Welcome to God is Open. I am your host, Christopher Fisher. Today on God is Open, this is a wine and chill. And I got John Fisher. John Fisher, welcome to the show. Did you pick out a vintage wine, a vintage red, some sort of dry?
I didn't realize that this was a wine.
Nobody knows these things. And so I got a vintage apothic red, the cheap wine. Like I like a good blend of cheapness and taste. And so I can't do that Trader Joe's $3 wine anymore. It's just too bad. So I have to do a pocket thick red.
I always like Story Point. I don't know if you've ever had that. It's real good.
I don't know when that is. But yeah, so today we are talking about Molinism. And so I got a few clips. And there was a live stream in which a bunch of Molinists responded to Warren McGru. And then Warren's like, I'm going to make this very detailed, thought out response. I'm like, I'm just gonna watch it and respond to it.
Yeah, so this is a response to a response.
Well, right, but let me present real quick my screen, share screen, and let's see, where did it run off to? I got this was posted on God is Open by a man named Christopher, who is not me. Says, good afternoon. Just here to explain things poorly and get good information by those who correct me.
It's definitely not you.
Yeah, not me. I have watched precisely one YouTube video on Molinism by William Lane Craig, so I'm basically an expert now. So basically, God looked at all the possible options for the future and chose the best one. So he knows the free will choices we're going to make in this particular future. In my simple mind, you have A, everything is determined. B, not everything is determined. Molinism is determinism. Like God created a bunch of movies, watched them all, decided which movie was best, and pressed the play for real this time button. So now he's just sitting up there eating popcorn like, oh, this part's so sad. Or, oh, angels, look, this part is wild. Boom, called it. Didn't I tell you I knew the ending? This comes up because I had two church acquaintances try to explain to me why Molinism is correct, and I may or may not have told them that their ideas were, quote, ridiculous and found nowhere in the Bible. oh, it's so funny. And so, yeah, in my infinite wisdom, I think this guy's right in his description of Molinism. So Molinism is the idea that God has middle knowledge, and middle knowledge is the idea that God can know things, and those things are not determined because God was able to figure out and choose. And they don't actually think that there was a moment of time where God never knew some things, like there was never like a decision point. These are all logical moments. So when you hear the word logical moment, they don't want to ever say that there's a time where God didn't know which future he was going to actualize. And to get around him making a choice, that they just label it a logical moment and think the problem disappears. And so God looks and sees all possible futures, and then he has some sort of formula which maximizes utility by which he chooses which future to then actualize. And so that's my understanding. And so that doesn't seem to me practically different than determinism, because in determinism, you have a future list of all events that are fated. They cannot be subverted. They must happen, and they're not falsifiable. And so if the future is picked in this sort of fashion, and these things 100% must come to fruition. Oh, I was going to pull up one of these memes I made for these Molinists. I'll pull that up as well. But it seems to me that if there is some sort of future list of 100% unfalsifiable events, then fatalism and determinism is true, and we don't actually have free will. What do you think about that? Or do you think the Molinists have a point?
I think if you can predict how everything's going to go exactly, that is a form of determinism. Even if you want to say that God isn't the one who's determining it, he picked through many multiple paths, it's still saying that basically everyone is predetermined to do whatever they're going to do anyway. That you can predict in advance exactly what someone's going to do. And therefore, it's somehow determined because of that, right?
Right.
Like,
And so,
I think what they're trying to do is get away from the idea that God determined everything, except he's still picking the one he likes. So I guess there's this weird caveat where not everything that has to be is, or not everything that can be is, which is different, I guess, than what determinists say. They want to say everything that can be is what happens, and there's nothing else. But it's such a like obscure philosophical point that who cares? Like who do you get one over with this Molinist idea?
right. So it appears to me that they want a system in which not all events are necessary. In a fatalistic or deterministic world, all events are necessary events. And a necessary event, as defined by William Lane Craig, is an event which could not be otherwise. And so they say, see, since God picked between all these possible futures, then all these possible events have alternatives and they didn't have to be. Well, the problem with that is there was never a point in which all these events weren't 100% fatalistically determined, unfalsifiably. That these are not.
I mean, like the only way it makes sense is to say God is the only one with free will.
But they don't want to do that.
They don't want to do that.
They can't have that.
Yeah. So I don't understand why it matters to say it's a necessary event or not if you're going to insist it's determined in some meaningful way anyway. Like, what does that get you?
I'm missing all my comics that I drew. I had a nice Molinism comic in which like I deal with these Molinists all the time, and my comic was basically a flowchart. Like, does God know what color shirt I will wear tomorrow, and can he change it? If so, did he know what color shirt I would wear tomorrow? And they'll say, yes, he could change it, but then he would have known what different color shirt you would have worn. That wasn't the question. You can't change the premise of the question. You can't do that. So the point of their question is to point out that they don't believe that God actually has the volition to change things, and the things that he knows will happen must happen, and not even God himself can subvert it. So it is just a form of determinism that even God is subject to. So even in Calvinism, with a few future that's fated deterministically, God is just an organ. He's just a mechanism in this long chain of fatalistic events. Even if you want to try to attribute to him causation, no, he's just a piece in the larger scope. So I can't find that comic offhand, but we do got Tim Stratton. I'll share him. Well, I'll probably keep looking for the comic. I don't know, but we'll share Tim Stratton, and he will give a little bit of an overview of what he sees as the key aspects of Molinism. Any comments while I pull this up? What is meant by mere Molinism? All right, we'll let him talk.
Ingredients. So,
So he said mere Molinism has two ingredients. Now he's going to tell us those ingredients.
Molinism entails two key essential ingredients. That's one, logically prior to God's decision to create the world, our omniscient God knew everything that would happen in any possible scenario he could create. Now, this entails something called God's middle knowledge, at least if God is powerful enough to create he never does create a free creature. So that's kind of a mouthful. Let me just make it simple, and I'll just say this. The first ingredient is an omnipotent and omniscient God possesses middle knowledge. So that's the first thing. So if you believe that that God is both omnipotent and omniscient, then I'm going to show you that he does possess middle knowledge. So that's the first thing. God possesses middle knowledge. The second ingredient is that beings created in the image of God, humans, like God, possess libertarian freedom. Now, libertarian freedom can be either the ability to choose between or among a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with one's nature at a given moment. And in my book, I demonstrate that God and man both possess this kind of freedom. Or it could just simply mean a creature, a human has libertarian freedom if they are not always causally determined. by something or someone else. And then I will argue in my book that God has this kind of freedom as well. So let me summarize that. The second key ingredient is that I could just simply say that humans possess libertarian free will, at least occasionally. And then in my book, I'll support that philosophically and biblically. So it's vital to see here that.
All right, so that's his definition of Molinism. That number one, that God chooses between a range of futures, and two, that mankind has libertarian free will. And so, I don't know if you saw my interaction with atheist Pine Creek, in which I was talking about what would entail libertarian free will, and I made the point that libertarian free will. There's no other type of free will. Free will, if it exists, has to be indistinguishable on some level from mere randomness. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell between the two, whether or not some decision had some element of randomness or free will had some element of free will. Like our decisions.
Yeah. For it to be meaningful, it has to be unpredictable at some point, in some element of it. And that unpredictability, yes, would be indistinguishable from randomness. That it's not like arguably you could say free will is purely the random wild card element within human decisions, because you can't distinguish between the two, right?
Right. Like, so if randomness existed and no free will existed, you wouldn't be able to know the difference. If you had all the data available to you, you wouldn't be able to distinguish the two. And this is not to say that our decisions aren't influenced. Like, I say, hey, clean your room or I'll give you spankings. I don't really spank my kids, or they're pretty good kids. Clean your room, I'll give you spankings. That influences their decisions. And so having free will doesn't mean all your decisions are random and baseless and have no sort of outside input. But at some level, in some respect, just keep wiggling around. Just put yourself on mute while you wiggle.
I can't.
You can. There's a little mute button.
All right, I shrink it while my wiggles down.
When you need to talk.
I can't believe it's that loud.
Yeah, you're like wiggle, 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 wiggle. So there has to be some level, no matter how minute, indistinguishable from randomness. That libertarian free will, if it exists, would exhibit those properties. But so he wants to claim that mankind has this libertarian free will, and God has this type of free will. But if, as we're discussing,
I'm very annoyed by the way that there's some need to throw this libertarian word on it. It's giving the Calvinists too much credit, that they can claim free will is just like, I don't know, indistinguishable from a rock wanting to follow the course of gravity down a hill. And
right.
That's the will of the rock. And they'll say, oh, well, Aristotle defined it as telos or something, right?
But the Calvinists, when they're defining will, they think it's like a computer program in our heart, and so they'll
it's not free. What's the free in that?
Exactly. They'll say it's us following our greatest desires. It's like, when in your life have you always followed your greatest desires? Like, nah, not often.
No.
But they say the human heart has a computer code that you could just run inputs through, and then you could get all these various results based on whatever inputs. And I think the Molinists are doing the same thing. And so, have you ever heard of the video game Soma?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Soma, the premise of Soma is that someone's able to upload their consciousness to a computer cloud. Like they wake up and they don't at first realize that they are, in fact, the computer consciousness that has been uploaded and not their real self. But in this video game, you're able to upload people's entire mental state into a cloud and then run simulations through it to see, and then keep trying iterations until you get what you want. You just have to make the right moves. And so the Molinist sees God as a master programmer running all of reality through these multiple simulations in order to find the maximally great universe in order to actualize that universe. But if there was an element of free will or an element of randomness, you won't be able to actually pick a future, a universe, which actualizes exactly how the simulation goes, because that violates the concept that there has to be some level of randomness. It's not like Groundhog's Day, where all events happen the exact same way every single time. If free will existed, there should be slight variation somewhere that might have cascading effects.
I think we should also be offended at the idea that real life can be identically simulated, like and act like that's that's somehow not real on its own. If it's so indistinguishable from whatever is actually real, then it is real on its own. And so in the Molinist world, probably everything happens. So that everything that can happen happens, and there's
at least conceptually in God's mind. I mean, you could have like dreams and stuff, and
but what's the difference? I think this idea that this is so easy to distinguish between the two, that's something that's identical in all possible ways. And I think what he tries to get around, and that's why I'm like cringing, is that he thinks, well, God is so powerful, he can just think through everything in his own personal way. Don't you think God's powerful? Don't you think God's powerful? I think God's powerful.
Well, you're going to get some of that in the next thing that I share. It's going to be, they're going to be starting talking about perfect being theology. But I do think you have a point. If I am perfectly replicated in all respects in the mind of God, going through these multiple simulations, maybe there's a simulation where like I live life running around in a diaper, quacking everywhere. Like what's the difference between me perfectly simulated in God's
one
mind?
Of your free choices.
Well, one of the possible ranges of free choices.
If God tries to influence you in that possible way. Oh.
Right. So I have this cousin on my, well, you don't know him, but he was posting on Facebook. He's like, they called me crazy when I ran 14 miles. They called me crazy when I ran 20 miles backwards. And I posted under his, it's like, they called me crazy when I wore a bucket on my head and walked around quacking like a duck. He was not appreciative of my comment.
I mean, he probably thought he was making this amazing point, right?
Well,
like, about his own perseverance and endurance. Like, you're just making fun of it.
Yeah, I'm just making like ridiculous jokes. And so you probably should, this is life tip. Don't do that because people like talking about themselves. And so if you undermine them talking about themselves, they're not very happy. But it was really funny. Oh man. Okay. Here I got, they talk about nothing for a while, and so we probably have to jump in maybe about here. We'll go here. So this is the live stream. This is the react to Warren McGru's video on Molinism. And so there's not a super amount of substance in this video, so we're doing a chill stream. And so grab your favorite beverage and we'll just chill and we'll listen to what they're saying and we'll discuss some of their concepts and we'll see what they say.
And then we're going to respond to this. Let me know if you can't hear it. Hopefully it's...
I don't hear it right now.
How that would unfold. Now, middle knowledge assumes that there's a single determinate truth about how each creature would freely choose, even in indeterministic situations. But that's a highly questionable assumption because by definition, indeterministic scenarios allow for more than one possible outcome. So if multiple outcomes are truly possible, there shouldn't be one fixed fact about what would happen. The Molinists claim that God uses this middle knowledge to choose a world where free creatures do exactly what he wants. But here's the problem. These creatures do not exist yet. So the truth of what they would do can't be grounded in them.
Okay, I want to pause it there. For the that's the opening part. We already have Warren agreeing with himself. All right. So any responses you guys have to that? Should I keep going in the video?
Well, should we talk about what the grounding objection is first, or like really kind of define that, or what do you think?
If even
Yeah,
before
fine.
that, to kind of set this up, if that's okay. So it's fun. Well, one, it's funny that you say, should we talk about what it is? Not that Warren didn't necessarily talk about it, but I don't.
I don't think they answer this grounding objection. And so in Molinism,
Wait, really? They never get to his point?
well, not the 15 to 20 minutes that I watched yesterday. I don't think they get to the grounding objection.
Okay.
Grounding objection is an argument against Molinism, which states that if God has this type of knowledge of all the events that we're going to do, by what's the basis of that knowledge? From whence does it come? So if I have the free will to make my own decisions, how can God know those decisions before I'm even born, to make those decisions? On what is his knowledge grounded? It's the grounding objection. So there's a future list of all actions I will ever take before I exist to make them. And so realistically, functionally, Molinism denies free will in human beings. We don't actually have free will. God's able to run perfect simulations with perfect results, knowing all our priors determine all our actions. It's nothing inside of myself making the decision. All my decisions can be perfectly calculated to the T, 100% unfalsifiable. They can be known with precision. So it's not actually me making these decisions.
So what does he mean when he says libertarian free will? Because I don't think you would agree with your definition of indistinguishable from randomness, right?
You don't know
because
what?
If he agreed that libertarian free will was indistinguishable from randomness,
he never
at
agreed.
some point. No, yeah, I know he doesn't, because that's incompatible with Molinism. That definition is incompatible. So I'm asking, what is his definition of libertarian free will?
That's a good question. I think it's making decisions in yourself, having your own volition or something like that.
How is that different than what the Calvinist says?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's super defined, and I don't think it behooves them to super define it.
Okay.
And so someone's saying that my volume here is low. I'm trying to turn it up. We'll see if this is better.
I think Warren made many objections, or actually arguments, in the video. That's one of the reasons I brought up maybe we should have him on. Sure, I want to be charitable, but at the same time, I didn't really see many arguments. I saw assertions. So he says, well, they can't be this or it can't be that. But he doesn't really give arguments as to why not. And for those to just even lay a grounding, if you will, before even the grounding objection, with open theism, it seems that any Christian, most Christians historically are going to use two controls or guides for their understanding of God. One is going to be scripture, and the second is going to be perfect being theology. So,
okay, you catch that? Christians
What was the first one?
Scripture, and the second one was perfect being theology. Okay, so this is what I criticize quite often on my program, is like people's perception of God is like they'll go in like a room and they'll sit down and they'll maybe be in like a circle, be like, all right, guys, we got to come up with what God is. Okay, so he's got to be the best. And then someone's like, oh, okay, I know what makes him best. He doesn't learn information. They're like, oh, that's a good one. Like, how about he wears a hat? Like, a hat's better than no hat. And the guy's like, yeah. And another guy's like, what if it's two hats? Two hats are definitely better than one. Oh yeah, that's it. We're getting closer. Like, this is a weird, subjective, introspective exercise in which people use subjective opinions to formulate how they think reality works. I need to go try to find. I went to the randomness conference a long time ago, but I took a picture of the board, and some black guy wrote a big formula on the board. He's like, see, this is God. It's just like this formula. I was like, click, take a picture. What are you talking about? What is this? What is happening here?
You should show the physicists.
You should show the physicists. So they talk about, so Tim Stratton, in one of his interviews, I was listening to a couple of his interviews today. He's introduced, and he's like, he's getting his master's in metaphysics. I'm like, oh. I'm thinking of the Mencken quote. So you bought me for one Christmas a book with writings from H.L. Mencken.
Yeah.
And he just eviscerates metaphysics. He says that metaphysics is the study of organized nonsense, and that seems to be intuitively true. Like these, they all disagree with each other. They're all arguing over these weird trivialities in the ether, and there's no evidence that any of these things have any connection to reality.
Mhm.
You're like, what is happening?
The more untethered, the more profound they think it is.
Yeah. Okay.
That's like Plato's allegory of the cave is very much that, by the way. It's this idea of saying, well, everyone else is just looking at shadows and figuring things out based on the evidence of the shadows. But we see things clearly because we've ascended. But they haven't. They're just like, they're no different than people who are high on something. And do think they see colors when, that's just like neurons misfiring.
Right. Okay. I might have the picture. Let me.
We hear colors. You see colors.
Oh man. Yeah, it was interesting. So I actually met Ben Arbor at this conference. Oh, I don't think I got maybe I took it on a different camera. Man, I got too many pictures. But I met Ben Arbor there. Ben Arbor, they reference him somewhere, maybe in this interview or another one. He had this whole thing on. It was about. He wrote a book against open theism, and so there's essays against open theism. They might actually reference it here, but I don't have the picture offhand. But the guy had a big formula on the board, like this is God. It's like, oh, okay. So Hudson says metaphysics is organized nonsense. What author did you say wrote this, Chris? This is H.L. Mencken, and so there's. Mencken Christom, what is it? What's the word? His compilation of writings.
It's a word he made up for himself. It's like Christophomothy or something. But he's a famous journalist from around 1920s to 1940s.
Yeah, like he one of his good writings.
Influential, and then shut down by FDR, like a bunch of journalists were.
Right. And so he had one against Lincoln's address. He's like, he says these things, but he's the person fighting against self-determination. Like,
yeah, he's funny.
Yeah, he was actually, he was very popular. He wrote some like English language.
He's very influential. Yeah,
but yeah, he was shut down by the government because he was subversive to their war efforts.
For the open theist, as you know, they'll say that God doesn't know the future. The future's open, and it seems that their move here is twofold in order to try and preserve some type of perfect being theology, and uphold Scripture. And within perfect being theology, God must at least be omniscient, omnipotent, and morally perfect. Well, it seems that their move here, like I said, is twofold. One is they present a grounding objection against foreknowledge or middle knowledge. And then they redefine omniscience in terms of what is immodally, in terms of what is logically.
Okay, so what's happening here is he's criticizing open theists. And so he's saying that there are open theists, and he's probably not all open theists he's referencing, but there is a tendency in open theism to still want to ascribe to perfect being theology. And so like on God is Open, there was a guy who got really, really mad at me when I said that Moses used arguments to convince God not to destroy Israel in Exodus 32. An open theist guy was very mad at me because, are you able to guess why?
Because he's not supposed to outsmart God.
Well, yeah, it's basically God is supposed to have at the forefront of his mind all truths, facts, logic in one instance. So
Moses will never point out anything that he hasn't thought of.
Yeah, so God should have perfectly reasoned through this very explicitly before Moses. So it has to be In his mind, it has to be the personal interaction that's the deciding factor rather than the arguments.
So I guess he takes allegorically the comment when God says, "It didn't even enter my mind that they would do this."
That verse says, "It didn't enter my mind to command you to sacrifice your children to Moloch." And so, but he would take allegorically things like, well, like God says, I will remember your sins no more. He'll say, well, God will still remember the sins, but he just won't bring them to the forefront. Things like that. So you have to dismiss the verses which God is thinking, and then explicitly in the text in Ezekiel, when God says that the arguments were the reason he changed his mind in Exodus 32, you got to really dismiss God telling the reason why he did something.
Yeah.
Because
the thing is, I know that a lot of people, especially when they're used to not being an open theist, like you start working out the omniscience question, and you slowly start realizing all of these things that you just take for granted can't really be taken for granted. Idea omnipotence, omnipresence, like all of these things. The tulip doesn't seem to work. The perfect being in all its forms, and so I think there are people who haven't gotten to that point where they realize that a lot of these things all sort of hang together and fall together.
So there's a Thomas Ord wing of open theism who denies that God has coercive ability, because that's antithetical to love. And so people kind of build hierarchies of God's capabilities. Yes, God is omnipotent and omniscient, but he doesn't have the power to forget something, because that would violate his omniscience, things like that. And so the Thomas Ord wing of open theism prioritizes God's love and says, well, he can do everything but coerce, because coercing is not in love. And so there was a speech given by one of these people, and famous open theist Terence Fretheim responded. Like he's an old scholar, biblical scholar, wrote all these scholarly works of biblical commentary, and he gets up to respond. He gets up there, and like one of the points was about the flood, and then Terence Fretheim, because one of the ideas of this God is love type of open theism, prioritizing God's love, is to shield God from blame. God is not responsible for the sin during the flood, because he didn't have the coercive ability to stop it from happening, because that would violate his nature. Therefore, he's free from blame. And so Terence Fretheim gets up there. He says, yeah, in the Bible, God bears some responsibility for his creation's actions. And like the crowd is aghast. They're just like, what? What did he just say? That God is responsible in some respect for the sin of his creation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
If you raise your kids and they turn out to be scumbag murderers, it might not be all your fault, but it might be a little bit your fault. You did bring them into this world. You did raise them. God blames himself in Genesis 6 for the condition of mankind. He says, I wouldn't have done this. If I could do it again, I wouldn't have done this. He's blaming his own act in creation partially for their sin. So God is not free of blame or responsibility. And that's not a concept we find in the Bible, that God is free from all criticism, free from all responsibility. Creature.
Yeah. He's also very much willing to coerce when he thinks necessary. Jonah's a big example. But also killing people is a form of coercion, is it not?
Well, they'll say that those parts of the Bible are not helpful for understanding theology. And so, like, Thomas, well, because they're not.
Are you serious that that's what they say? I don't understand.
Well, yes, because this is there's wings of Christianity that don't prioritize biblical criticism or biblical authorialship or biblical priority, and so they'll prioritize philosophical concerns like God's love.
What are you even discussing with someone who just says love takes priority over?
You just do this. You're like, oh, okay.
It's not a conversation anymore because there's no common source of authority or meaning.
That's why you just say, oh, that's nice.
Okay.
So Thomas Ord sent Michael Sayers, open theist author, wrote a bunch of books. Thomas Ord sent him. I was talking to I went to Michael Sayers' house. He's in Seattle or whatever. I met with him, and he's telling me, he's like, "Yeah, Thomas Ord sent me his book," and then I sent him comments back saying, "This isn't biblical. This isn't biblical. This isn't biblical." And then Thomas Ord just responded, "Yeah, those aren't helpful for the position." Biblical priority is not going to reach everyone, and so those types of individuals, you just say, "You're open theist too. You could believe you're not going to proselytize them and then like convert them to biblical open theism. They're just they're just not. It's not. They're never going to get there. So you just say, oh, "Okay, you're an open theist. Let's promote open theism.
I'll be happy."
But so they are criticizing our Molinist friends the open theist tendency to also adopt perfect being theology and then redefine words. But the thing is that I think open theists have like probably the best scholarship on metaphysics, on perfect being theology. They got people like, oh man, I just had it on my tip of my tongue. I met the guy at the Randomness conference. What's the big open theist philosopher?
Stratton?
No. That's a biblical open theist scholar. I was thinking like Richardson or something.
Yeah.
I'll find the guy's name. Maybe someone in the comments could throw it out there. But like open theists can have robust metaphysics, and so if someone's prioritizing perfect being theology, it does not preclude you from being an open theist. But the one question you do have to ask is, I don't like the way that these people, they use the word biblical. Oh, Molinism is biblical. No one in the Bible's teaching Molinism. At best, at best, Molinism is Bible compatible.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Like, do they have a proof text?
Swinburne's the guy I was thinking of. Richard Swinburne. He's a big open theist philosopher, and so that is what I'm thinking. Like, well, no one in the Bible taught. They'll say it though. They'll say Molinism is biblical.
It's possible to know. So that seems to me the two strategies for the open theist. And as Warren just presented or alluded to, that first move is going to be like a grounding objection. Because if God doesn't know the future, but it's possible for him to know the future, well, then the open theist is going to have to be, I don't want to say excuse, but they're going to have to give a reason as to why not. And hence, that grounding objection is usually one of the first things that come up for open theism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one of the things that I found interesting about the statement that Warren said there, I think he said, when I paused it, that God actualizes a world. I'm not getting the direct quote exactly right. God actualizes a world in which all human beings do exactly what he wants them to do.
Yeah,
isn't that what he said?
Yeah, and that's false on Molinism.
Yeah, so we would agree. We would say, well, no, not every person. He knows what everybody's doing.
So that is.
He can say it's false, but because his definition is everyone's free, right?
It's actually true, because they think that a possible world does not exist in which all people do exactly what God wants. And so God's only taking from available worlds that are possible and actualizing the one with the most utility. But that doesn't mean everyone. There's not a world that could exist in which all people are perfect and don't sin. And so if there was, he would have actualized that world. But the scope of our free will or whatever.
Okay, so that is a slight distinction with Calvinism then.
Right. And so God is actualizing the best possible world. That's not the same thing as saying God's actualizing the world in which all the best things happen for everyone in every single person's individual lives. That sort of world, that blend, just doesn't exist to be actualized.
Best of all possible worlds.
Possible worlds, and not all worlds are possible worlds.
I guess all the other options must have been terrible, huh?
Well, The diaper clucking like a chicken was a less good option.
Good thing you didn't pick that one for you.
Might have been a nice life. You never know.
It is that life for some people. He just didn't pick it for you.
Did I tell you about that crazy guy I tried to hire once? Oh, I was like, hey, he come work for me or whatever. And like he went insane, and then he got instituted in like a mental asylum for a while, and then he gets out. And so then I go out for like beers with him. So he has his girlfriend, and then I bring my wife or whatever, and we go sit down for beers, and he's telling me all about his mental breakdown. And like at one point of the conversation, he's like, I realize now that I did not write the Bible. Like, oh, okay. well, that's good. That you realize that. Like, oh man.
How long will you realize that before changing your mind?
Like all his posts, I'm still friends with him on Facebook like a decade later, and it's just absolute insanity that goes on. I'm like, what is happening in this poor man's life? Oh man. But yeah, so there are crazy people out there. Anyways.
But not everybody's doing what he wants them to do.
Yeah, that's like saying, so Warren's going to get a little bit of what I typically give Calvinists, and that's like saying that Dr. Strange wanted Thanos to do everything that he did in Endgame, or that he wanted Gamora to give 2 vicious knee strikes.
No. Don't use Marvel references. Oh.
Hopefully everyone watched whatever he's talking about.
Well, I did not watch Endgame. I can't do it anymore. No more Marvel for me. And maybe if something comes along, or maybe if I'm like super bored one day, but it's like no. Like I see clips. There was one that someone put on Twitter, and they're like, how isn't this movie making millions of dollars? And I just watch it, and it's just boring CGI fighting with no purpose, and it's just pointless action. Like, what? Who?
I think it's build up from a lot of other movies, and so everyone's waiting for like a conclusion.
Well, they were posting it for the scene. They thought that the scene justifies the movie, like making money. It's like, what is like you could watch something like The Duelists, which is like, what is that? Ridley Scott.
Was that actually Ridley Scott?
I think it was. I think it was like one of his first works. The 1970s or 80s one, where the people face off over the course of years.
Yeah.
Like that action was meaningful. It wasn't just pointless flashing lights, Transformers going off in the background.
Their dueling was kind of meaningless, but it actually was part of the plot in a key way. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then there's whoever's winning at the time, and it kind of goes back and forth to try to build to crescendos, whatever. But anyways, I'm just saying, let's try. I know Tim Stratton loves Marvel. Like, please, Tim, if you're watching this, just pick something else. Like, switch it up, maybe. I don't know.
Does he watch you? I don't know. He clearly watches Warren.
Well, yeah, he watched. I'm persona non grata, so it's maybe a 50-50 he watches.
Yeah, it's an interesting reality you live in.
Right.
Peter Quill below the belt in that movie too. Dr. Strange didn't want those things, but he chose that world based on the best possible end game. And this is something that I think we're going to, because I said we're going to talk about analogies later, and Warren gives an analogy I think offered by another friend of mine, Alan Rhoda, and I'm saying, okay, I get your analogy, guys, but it's not relevantly analogous to Molinism, or at least not the kind of Molinism that I've been defending over the last several years. And so I hope that people, I encourage my interlocutors and those who disagree with me to attack the strongest form of Molinism here, or at least attack.
I looked at all possible Molinisms. So I picked the strongest.
So the problem with Doctor Strange in Endgame was that,
mind here. And so I'm going to give what I think is a better analogy moving forward. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, should we talk about what the grounding objection is, or you want to save that for later, or what do you think?
Yeah, we can do that.
Why does this guy
Yeah, I mean,
keep
just
flashing
simply
in
the
and
grounding
out?
objection.
You what?
Why does this camera keep turning on and off?
Maybe he needs to wipe his nose or something, or
You know,
run to the bathroom, or cough.
Okay.
Or sometimes I do that. I don't know. But I was just remembering our conversation about the video game Soma. One of the horrific things about that video game, and the video game is very horrific, is one of the ideas you have to deal with, as we already discussed, was, is that perfect representation of that person that you're running through those different iterations? Is that torture? Is that horrific that you're making these people experience these things if those people are people? And so we're talking about, if a perfect copy of us exists in God's mind running through these simulations, is that horrific torture of conscience, sentient beings? One thing we might have.
It sounds like you're not actually getting the result you want. You're getting all results.
All results, but then one timeline. I don't know what constitutes the actual timeline. So people like William Lane Craig believes that God is time bound. So he doesn't believe that God is timeless, and he also rejects concepts such as divine simplicity. And how do I know this? I asked him directly when I met him at ETS. You were at ETS with me. Did you see William Lane Craig? Were you in that session with me where I met him?
I think it was.
Yeah.
I remember talking to him, and then Josh McDowell, I think, was there too.
I don't remember Josh McDowell there. NT Wright? Did you go to NT Wright?
I never.
Yeah, NT Wright was very non-personable. I was like, "Hey, can I get a photo with you?" And he's just like, gives me this like glare, like, "Why would the hell would I want a photo with you?" Like,
why not?
Can I get it anyways?
You thought you'd do one of those left-wing things where they try to flip off the people in the picture once they take it.
He was just he didn't seem very much interested in like his fans.
Claim that what we call counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, and we're going to abbreviate that probably a lot in this conversation and just say CCFs. So when we say CCFs, we mean counterfactuals of creaturely freedom. Big fancy word. So it's like this: if Peter were in situation S, he would freely deny Christ. Okay, so that's like, if that claim can't be true unless it's grounded in something concrete, then it can't be known. So that's what the grounding objection is. So critics argue that unless the persons or events exist in actuality, then the proposition has no basis. It's got to be something concrete in reality. So therefore, God couldn't know such things. And if that's the case, then Molinism would collapse. But I think this objection assumes and presupposes a controversial metaphysical view. Right? It's not like there's some unanimous agreement that this view is even something that should be affirmed here, and that is true. It's assuming and presupposing a controversial metaphysical view called Truthmaker maximalism. And that's the idea that every truth must be grounded in some concrete metaphysical entity.
Well, even if it's not. And so what he's criticizing is the idea that all truth values of the future exist in some sort of real sense today. And he's saying not all truth values that will exist, even truth values that will exist certainly, not all those truth values exist as a reality today. That might be true, but that still doesn't get around the problem of determinism. That what's the basis for those things occurring in a non-falsifiable 100% without variation sense? It must be that the universe works deterministically and there's no other options. We're still all fated. You don't get around the fatalism idea. You might get around this. There's existing truth values of the future, but you don't follow to any sort of system of free will.
I actually thought he was going to go somewhere else and start talking about the nature of human beings being knowable before they exist, and whether you can like know a person or as a person, right?
Yeah.
Like it seems like that's where Warren was, right? That would be responding to Warren's ideas that human beings are a unique entity that comes into reality and then is free, detached from the stream of history in some form to add to it in their free choices. But I think what he's sort of saying or assuming some metaphysical reality where you can know exactly what that human being is. You can recreate that human being in every detail in some simulation. I think Warren is saying that you can't, that person doesn't exist, and it's not meaningful to create that. So that's the metaphysics I thought he was getting at. Not really an epistemology question, but an actual, that is what's called ontology question. Mm-hmm. Is a human being reconstructible? Can I download my consciousness somewhere and it's still me?
Can I have a Star Trek transporter that recreates me with molecules? And it might still me.
Yeah, I thought that's what Warren was getting at, but it seems like he completely changed what Warren was going for into an epistemology idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, I don't watch Warren's videos. He's too boring. No.
It's Warren here. Warren.
That's far from, like I said, it's far from uncontroversial, and I think it's likely false. And I've got a bunch to say on this, but before I go on, Eric, is there anything that you'd like to add, maybe to clarify what I've said so far?
Great stuff. So, another way to look at it is, when you look at the correspondence theory of truth, and I bring this up because the open theist has to use a grounding objection, not just for counterfactuals, CCFs, but also for foreknowledge. In other words, they have to give a reason why they can claim that, depending on which open theist you ask, but to just simplify, that there are things God doesn't know. I will put it that way. And so if truth is what corresponds to reality, let's just talk about future tense statements or propositions. Well, for me to say it's raining, it's going to rain tomorrow, well, that's a future tense proposition. And, Warren mentions the eighth year of time. Let's just say then, but tomorrow doesn't exist, right? Tomorrow isn't here. And so there's nothing for that statement for it to correspond to. And so there, how can it correspond to reality when the future doesn't yet exist? On top of
Okay, so what I believe is happening here is that they are using this bait and switch. They're using colloquial definitions or common definitions of knowledge. Like, I know that I will sleep in tomorrow, something like that. I'm not going to go to work tomorrow. Often on this program, I'm like, I'm going to go work. I'm not going to work tomorrow.
On a Saturday.
I'll sleep, and it'll be beautiful, and I'll be happy, and that it'll happen. Like no one's going to say, oh, you don't know that. It's like, if someone did, you're like, get out of here. Don't even talk to me anymore. Like, you're just being ridiculous. And so we conflate like our common perceptions and usage of language, and then they try to turn our common use of language into some sort of metaphysical absolute or formula that's run through metaphysical ether or something like that. Oh, your knowledge is what corresponds to truth. Well, yeah, but when you're talking about the future, these things are falsifiable. Like my kids might
contingent.
They might run in and wake me up. That doesn't matter. And if they don't, it's not like I didn't know this was going to happen. Knowledge is judged of future events is kind of judged after the fact, whether you're right or not. And then even sometimes when you're like, oh, I know I'm going to sleep in, and then events change, and maybe like I know the kids are going to wake me up early, like then my knowledge changes. It's not like I was wrong in the first place, just that things changed. And so what are my expectations for the future? They're conflating our normal conversation in linguistics with their metaphysics. And so this is one of the big problems of a lot of systematic theologies like this, is that they bait and switch a lot with how people understand concepts, and they do so in some sort of way to try to give themselves some theological advantage. But that's not what people are talking about when they talk about knowing the future. And when they talk about knowing the future, it's falsifiable. It doesn't have to happen. And so things can turn out differently. It's not as if they're talking about correspondence theory. So in that definition, your knowledge has to be something that corresponds to the truth. And so they're saying that truth has to actually exist now. And they're also claiming that we're using that definition when we're talking about our knowledge of the future, or even God's knowledge of the future. No, that's not how open theists are typically talking. And so then they want to claim monopoly on the word knowledge. Oh, then you're not really talking about knowledge. Well, we are talking about knowledge, but you're talking about a very specific type of knowledge, unfalsifiable, fatalistic knowledge. If we start calling it that, then our point will be very super clear that you're talking determinism, you're talking fatalism, and you're not using normal use of the word knowledge. And so you saw my debate with Matt Slick, right?
I think so, yeah.
Where he's like,
very, very awkward debate.
yeah, he's like, does God know the future? And I say, well, I know the future. And he's just like,
Well, yeah, he thought you were always saying things to just annoy him. You were never answering this specific question he was trying to get you on a train.
It's not hard to know the future.
And it's like, it was a lot of fun.
It's not hard to know the future. Every single person, every day, predicts an infinite amount of things.
It wasn't hard to know what Matt Slick was going to do.
Right. When you're driving down the road, you could predict that your car is going to keep on going at the relative general pace, and people get to work on time because they accurately predict a million things about the future in real time, subconsciously. That's all we do is predict the future every single day in a million different ways. But it's not the unfalsifiable prediction and knowledge of the future. It's not something that we can never be wrong. We are sometimes wrong, often wrong, but all the minor predictions we make throughout the day, I wave my hand like this. Like I didn't even have to think about if my body is going to respond to that. It's
most of them are right.
Right. It's like every day, this is how we operate. I'm just predicting the future. But it's not the type of knowledge that they would have us to believe. And so they want to say, hey, you guys agree that God can know the future. Well, guess what? We got this definition of knowledge, and now your system's kaput. Now your system can't work. Now you can't see. We just define knowledge. Now you can't use that word knowledge. You have to say God is guessing about the future, and God is uncertain about the future. Like,
yeah, why don't you just play their own game back at them? Be like, yeah, I'm omniscient.
Yeah, well, yeah, I do that to people. It's like, well, I'm omniscient too, I guess, or whatever. They're not very happy, but it's okay. My goal in life is not to make random people on the internet happy.
But that. Tell me what you think about this, Tim. It seems to presuppose also a perceptual view of omniscience, where you have conceptual view and perceptual view. Yeah. Something like simple foreknowledge, God, quote unquote, is going to look down or look ahead, however you want to word that, in order to know things. And so the grounding objection seems to work for a view like simple foreknowledge when it comes to counterfactuals. But if you take a conceptualist view of God's omniscience and say that God knows it by his very nature, it's part of his nature to know these things. Yeah. Well, then there's nothing, then tomorrow doesn't have to exist because God doesn't know by looking. Right. And it seems to me open theism has to presuppose a perceptual view of his knowledge. And so, yeah, the grounding objection would work if you presuppose that type of omniscience as open theism would presuppose.
Right. Yeah, it is a presupposition.
Okay, so the standard dynamic omniscience view of open theism is that God knows the future as possibilities. Like maybe that was
the point he was making. He's like, if that's what it is, then the grounding objection works with that definition. And then Tim says, yeah, that's an assumption.
Well, there's no truth makers of the future if the future only works on possibilities and probabilities, because there's no truth values that actually exist of the future.
Right. So Tim just says that that's an assumption, and that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's probably not going to make an argument for why that's not true.
Well, I think he's trying to say, hey, you guys don't even think future values have truth makers, and so we don't need to have it either. I feel like that's what he's saying here, which would be like maybe missing the point of the criticism.
Yeah.
It's like in your model, things are fatalistically known from time eternity without variation. Like,
how is it for you then?
Well, yeah.
And I have nothing against saying that God can see things, but he also just knows them before he sees them, if that makes sense. So God does just conceive all.
So he says God can see things, which is very interesting to me. So I wonder what sort of divine attributes he affirms. If he thinks that God is having these experiences from outside himself and acquiring from outside himself, he must, as well as William Lane Craig, deny divine simplicity, deny God being pure act or actus purus, or aseity or aseity.
Yeah.
He believes that God has potential, and I wonder how that works in a view in which God's knowledge of all future events is fatalistically known, that not even God can, not his words, my words, not even God himself can subvert those future events. But so, and maybe if I ever get to talk to him, I'll flesh those divine attributes out of him.
All of the truth values. He just knows the truth, and he also sees what's going on as they happen, right? So
I do have some interaction with this Tim Stratton guy in the past, and I think it was fairly hostile. I don't know, maybe I was just like in a hostile mood that day or whatever, and I'll have to pull it up because I do got a quote from him. Just Stratton. I do got a quote from him that I was like, I'm just gonna quote you on this. I'll let this play. I don't know if I want
to. We can affirm a type of this dynamic omniscience as well, but he's not limited to only this kind of omniscience. He knows the truth value to all propositions. And in my book, in the first edition, I do this, but I strengthen it in the second edition. I argue that if the ontological argument passes, and I argue that it does, then this actually helps us to flesh out what is greater. Is it greater to know all of these things, or is it greater to know? Here's what we do.
What is greater?
The greatest being that we can conceive of.
The greatest of the biggest hat, who has the largest muscle.
I just think of like there's a Whitest Kids You Know sketch in which
it's like my God can beat up your God.
Yeah. They're all in white robes and they're sitting around. They're like, we need to come up with names for months. And they're like, and one guy's like, January, and they're all like, oh, that's a good one. And then they're like, okay, how about the second month? February. They're all like, oh, there you go. For some reason, it's this introspective philosophizing. It's the twist of the sketch is that was a bunch of like frat guys who were just all in months were already named, and they just came up with the exact same names that already existed.
Can you conceive of a being who possesses mental knowledge? And that being would be greater than a being who doesn't. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all the details.
And if he was wearing a hat, could he be even better?
Maybe the greatest God is the one who doesn't know what's going to happen and wins anyway. What if that's the biggest and greatest God, the most glorious victory?
And he's got mutton chops and a mustache.
Yeah, the biggest mustache
are better than beards. that the greatest God conceivable has a mustache and at least 2 hats, greater than 2 hats.
He's the largest mustache.
He's got the largest mustache. And so if you could conceive, because God is whatever is the best conceivable being. And so a God who exists is more conceivable and better than a God who doesn't exist. So God must exist. And a God with a mustache is better than a God who just exists without a mustache. Well, so we'll add that. And then Molinism, of course, if God is able to do Molinist stuff, then of course. And then if he wears a hat, he's even better. Like
You can juggle 3 Molinist hats at the same time.
if he's wearing 3 hats, that's a great point. 3 hats are better than 2. Wow. We're getting close.
Details of what I discuss in my book right now, but I would point people there. But I agree with you, Eric. It seems to me that these open theists often just presuppose that God is seeing to learn on these issues. Anything else you'd add to that?
Well, I love that you bring in perfect being theology.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of like volleyballing back and forth. It's great.
You love this.
So
love it.
yeah, even on that, just sticking with that for a few more seconds with perfect being theology. Whenever I teach on logical fallacies and stuff, when we talk about omnipotence, I ask people, can you do something God can't? And most people say no, but the answer.
This is so predictable. This part. Do you know what he's going to say?
Sin.
What? Yep. That's exactly what he's going to do.
The answer is yes, you can. Right? You can
Mhm.
sin and you can learn.
Yeah.
But why can you learn? Well, because you don't know everything, whereas God does.
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever had an open theist in a class that I've taught like that, because I guess they would would have to say, well, God learns too.
Yeah.
God would,
I think they would.
God
I think they'd have to
says
say
that.
that.
God says that.
No, I would.
Yeah, God says it. Well, things. And so there's various people in the Bible who felt like they were very much wronged by God. Maybe they would call it sin, because sin is whatever puts you in wrong with another person in the Hebrew biblical concept. And so a sin doesn't even have to be like morally based. You might have like a private covenant or a private understanding that you're violating and you're putting the other person in wrong. And so in some circumstances, you can say that applies to God within the Bible. People get real mad and frustrated with God. Or sometimes Job gets mad at the lack of retributive justice within this world. He thinks God is shirking his duties as God to provide justice on earth. And so he's got some pretty harsh criticism. So the people who are in the Bible, the people who wrote the Bible, they don't have these moral outrage sensibilities about what is and what isn't fitting God that we today like, we got to shield God from all responsibility for evil. And so, okay, let's build a model.
No, it's the other way. God's responsible for why are you dealing with it?
Yeah, it's like, we'll build a model and we'll figure out a formula, and that formula will say that God, it doesn't apply to God. He's shielded from any blame. I'm referencing another meme, but people don't have a shared meme database with me where they could listen to all my crazy references.
I would say that even in one sense, libertarians like us and Molinists like us can even say that God learns, but not in a relevant sense. And I've got this from Ryan Mullins. Been talking to him recently, and he's like, "Hey, make sure you distinguish."
Can you
between,
hear this? Is volume going?
Relevant.
But
can't see it.
It's like,
I don't know if I don't put them back on screen if the volume goes or not. I'm like, I hope the volume is going.
Yeah, let's go.
We could just listen to them and just show our faces. I have no idea.
God knew prior to foundations of the world that I would freely choose to wear a black t-shirt today. And so then when today comes and I'm wearing the black t-shirt and I put it on, God knows now Tim is doing what I knew he would. So you can say he learns, or maybe what the time right now is 2:24 p.m. Central Time.
So there's an interesting interview with William Lane Craig in which William Lane Craig says that God doesn't have the type of knowledge like how to ride a bicycle, like mechanical knowledge. So there's different types of knowledge that we have access to. We have experiential knowledge. I know what it feels like to be sad, or to have be dehydrated, or for somebody to hurt my feelings or something like that. There's experiences that we have access to, and then there's the type of knowledge like how to ride a bike, like how to balance and stuff like that, or how to fix an engine, things like that that are like task-based, mechanical, that you learn through repetition, or you train your mind, right? And so God doesn't have this type of knowledge. William Craig is talking about, he only has access to these propositional phrases, like the knowledge that God has. And so Tim Stratton is talking about a different type of knowledge altogether. And it's interesting that he's attributing it to God, that God learns experientially through experience what experiences feel like. And so that's an interesting concession.
Yeah, I don't know if he really thought through what he was saying. Like God saw this in advance and experienced it, but now he's experiencing it for real and feels something differently. And I guess it goes back to the original question, like what is this difference between this foresight and it actually happening?
Mm-hmm. So God knows right now it is 2:24, and a minute ago he knew it would be 2:24. So you can still say that he learns what.
So this is another thing William Lane Craig does, is that God knows propositions in tensed sense. And so you're not actually knowing different propositions. It's all the same proposition, that this live stream would happen on 5/23/2025. And God knew that it would happen. And then while it's happening, that it does happen. And after it happened, that it did happen. But those aren't really different propositions. They're all the same proposition, but they're just in different tensed modes. And so in that way, he gets around this, God's knowledge is changing. Well, it's really not changing. It's just experiencing a tensed time shift or something like that, but it's really all the same thing. And so
what time it is as the clock ticks forward, that is, Warren would agree with dynamic time like that, but the relevant truth values don't change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So like if we ask the question, will Eric eat Taco Bell tomorrow?
Well, we all know that. We all know.
Right.
Yeah, we all know that.
Omniscience to know that. But
Yeah.
Interestingly, and we're kind of jumping ahead. So Josh, feel free to slap either of us on the wrist when you need to. What's interesting there is essentially the argument for the open theist would have to be that God cannot know something and it still be a contingent truth. And so if he knows that it's going to have to be necessary, I'm sure we'll touch into that later. But I bring that up because it's interesting. Tim, you said we all know that, right? Well, yes, everyone except for God on open theism, because if God knows it, then it's going to have to happen necessarily, because they appeal to a type of fatalism that's part of their presupposition. And
so open theists in the open theist debate, they're not doing themselves favors by adopting philosophical definitions for common words, because then they'll come back and say, you said God knows whatever. And so your definition of knowledge is that it corresponds to some sort of... Why are we playing this game where we have to... They're making fun of open theists. They say, everyone else can know the future but God, because God's knowledge in open theism is this special type. It's like, just use the normal definition of knowledge, and you don't get criticized like, mankind can know something that God doesn't know.
I mean, this is just harping around the same thing we've been discussing before. It's like they're not defining it. They're trying to define it in a way. God cannot know something that's contingent. I don't know what that means, by the way, because in Molinism, God looks at all possible paths, and all of those are contingent. Does that mean he doesn't know those paths?
Right. So the thing is with Molinism is that they try to win through arbitrary category creation. And so this is what I do. I have a podcast called The Modal Fallacy, in which I discuss using their definitions how all events are necessary events. A necessary event is an event which could not be otherwise. They say just conceptually, like here's what William Lane Craig tries to do this in his book. He's like, when you roll a dice, obviously it could have been one of those other numbers that came up. Well, not obviously. If the whole discussion is whether or not fatalism is true, then you can't just presuppose just because our mind is like, oh, a six-sided dice could be.
Our mind is approximating the result.
Right. Our minds, in fatalism, our minds would be tricked into believing whatever randomness. You can't just argue to common perception and then argue Molinism, which is not like a common perception. But in their view, the future is 100% going to happen in the way that God knows it will happen. And so they create this arbitrary category because God ran these simulations. They claim that all those simulations have 0% probability of happening, that they're all possible outcomes.
The possible still means contingent. So I don't know how that possible and contingent are similar, right?
Right. But they claim it's possible. But so I posted on a site. So I said, if something has a 0% chance of happening, it's not possible. And like this Calvinist guy got mad at me. He's like, oh, you would only believe that if you're an open theist. And so they want to claim that since a dice has six sides, even if one side is rolled 100% of the time without fail, that the other sides are still possible. And it seems to me arbitrary category creation to try to get around a problem that their side entails fatalistic determinism and that no other future is actually possible. And all events, every single one of them, is a necessary event. We're necessary creatures in God's mind. We're as necessary and as fated as God in all that exists. They want to get around this by just saying, the dice could roll a 5, even though there's a 0% chance of it ever happening, just because conceptually it could have.
I still need to understand what they even mean. And maybe what you're saying is true. They don't want to define what freedom is, what choice actually means.
What contingency actually is. If something has a 0% chance of happening, it's not a contingency. It's not a possibility if it can never, ever, never happen. It's a sleight of hand, arbitrary category creation. And so Molinism relies on this almost exclusively. And so they sound smart or whatever when they're trying to describe things. I was in a debate with a Molinist once on Discord, and he's like, well, let me tell you all about my Molinist theory. And so I responded, I said, the problem is none of the biblical authors thought like this or believed this. And he's like, oh, so you're granting all my Molinist points. I'm like, no. I just don't want to talk about your idiotic theology or your metaphysics that I'm just going to have to...
That has nothing to do with the Bible anyway.
I'm going to have to sit here and explain to you that something with a 0% probability is not a possibility and it's not a contingency. No matter how you try to define it, you're just making up categories to try to get around.
I guess he'll just say that you're making an assertion. You've got to prove it. That seems to be their complaint. Like when you come up with these responses, that's all they say is, "Those are assertions. Prove it."
Right. And so what I do in the modal fallacy video is I go to their own definitions. What does a necessary event entail? What does it mean to be something for something to be necessary? It's like it couldn't be otherwise. Well, what's more couldn't be otherwise than 100% unfalsifiable? Like, what is more necessary than that? Like, from all eternity, it has to be this way.
Yeah.
What is more necessary than that? And so it's a sleight of hand. It's like this rhetorical trick that they use. And they have decently intelligent individuals signing on to this nonsense that's anti-intuitive.
So it seems odd because, again, going back to
what are they getting out of Molinism?
God is not responsible for evil because
even like Frethheim, like you pointed out, says, look, in the open theist conception, just the fact that God created things means he's responsible for it.
Right, but they're not going to say that. They're going to say this is the best possible world. So God has.
If he didn't have to make any world.
Well, maybe that's not the best possible world. Maybe the good that comes from the actualized world.
It doesn't matter. Whatever it is that's the best, they're still responsible for it.
But anyways, this is their way to shield God from Calvinist criticism that God determines everything. All sin that ever happens is by God's hand. They'll say it's not by God's hand, it's by human free choice. And the reason it's by human free choice is because God exercised this type of world in which the free choice actually had some sort of basis in reality, rather than Calvinistic compatibilism in which people just do what they're programmed to do.
So they don't like the idea that someone is thrown into hell because God programmed them to go there.
Right.
That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go to hell because you were always going to do that, and this is the best possible world. The most people will make it to heaven, but sorry, you go to hell.
Right. God is shielded from criticism because all actions are human free choice. And they're human free choice because there is some sort of conceivable contingency in which people could have done otherwise. This is the basis of what's driving all of this. And so, of course, I reject it as absolute nonsense, and everyone else should too. All events are fated. All events are necessary. Even God is a cog in the system in the Molinist model.
Theology, if you have two gods, hypothetically, one that learns and one that doesn't learn in the relevant sense, as you pointed out, and the relevant sense here would be, Tim knows that tomorrow, if I'm offered Taco Bell, I will take it. Does God know that? Well, if it's going to be a free choice in the open theist, it seems to me would have to say no. So now you can know things God can't. So which being is great?
It's a sleight of hand. It's switching definition of knowledge from one example to the other. It's bad faith. Now, I'm not saying he's smart enough to know what he's doing, but that's what he's doing.
Greater, a being that I can outperform epistemically, or a being that never learns and cannot be outperformed by mere humans and has always known all truths from eternity past.
Now, just to be fair,
we're not going to be fair here.
Well, we shouldn't be, but do you think they would say, well, God knows as much as you do, and maybe even more, that if Eric is offered Taco Bell tomorrow, he'd take it, but you don't know that with certainty and with 100% certainty, and neither does God. Do you think they'd make that distinction?
It's a great question. So it's going to depend on which one you ask. So there's a great book. It was edited by the late Ben Arbor. It's like philosophical essays against open theism. And
yeah, that's the Ben Arbor reference I talked about earlier. Ben Arbor tragically died in like a car accident, so it wasn't like a natural death or anything like that. So very sad. But I did meet the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned a lot from him. And my friend who formerly taught at New Orleans, I'm sure you're friends with him as well, Robert Stewart. He wrote a chapter in that book and basically said on open theism, either I can know God things God does not, or I can know things before God knows them. And with
okay, so this depends on the type of open theist that you're talking to. If God learns through mediated knowledge, and that I mean, does God learn through sight? Like, or is God's, like when we hear stuff, there's sound waves that reach us. It's from outside source, and so the information exists before it reaches us, and that we are aware of it, and we take information from outside ourselves. We parse it, we translate it in our brain. My brain translates light waves to patterns in order to give my mind images. And so the information pre-exists my knowledge of the information. So if God's senses work through mediated knowledge, then God has the information exists before God knows it. But a lot of open theists want this type of this is why the guy got mad at me when I said that Moses gave arguments that God listened to those arguments and convinced him with arguments. Got mad at me because God God in some open theistic models has access to like the whole database of
instant access to every molecule.
Yeah, like there's a ongoing database of truth values. And in this model, this mental model, this is how you could mentally model it. I don't buy this mental model that there's a metaphysical list of
you
values.
could say he knows the hairs of your head and whenever a sparrow dies, that sort of thing. So I understand that kind of idea would be driving the instantaneous knowledge, even if that's not really what that proves.
Right. So his knowledge, maybe there's a variable in the either. How many hairs are on my head? And it's just updated in real time. But that is
changing in real time.
synchronized. It's synchronized in this open theistic model with the knowledge God has. And so this is what they're criticizing, that if God's knowledge is mediated, then the information exists before God knows it. And conceivably, we might know something before God, even if it's the most minute fraction of a second. And they are right that if God's knowledge is mediated, that the information exists before God knows it. And so they're not wrong in this respect. And their objection, their objection to that is like,
I don't like it.
if information exists and then God doesn't know it, and then someone has access to that information first,
they get one up on God.
That doesn't meet my perfect being theology. The more perfect being would have access to it before someone else, because that would make him bad. It would be so bad if someone knew something God didn't. It would be terrible. Can you imagine? Like, okay,
it's not a God on worship.
Well, sure. I guess if it makes you sad, it's probably false.
If God doesn't have the infinite hats, then he's not worth worshiping.
If God doesn't have access to real-time hair counters,
yeah.
Whoa.
What's interesting is I want to say it's Boyd. I'll have to, so don't quote me on that. But essentially, what he argues is that on open theism, God is going to have false beliefs. Now, what he does, he quotes, I forget who, again, don't quote me on this. I can look it up if I need to. But long story short, what the person he's responding to, what they initially say is that, well, the reason is because if God is surprised, or if God is kind of caught off guard or something like that, or if God acted on an expectation, that means he held a belief. And if what he believed didn't come to pass, or he's surprised by it, then he had a false belief. Now,
that would be terrible.
Yeah, isn't Jeremiah 18, the clay was marred. I couldn't make the thing I thought I was going to make.
Yeah.
Like it's objectively in the Bible. The Bible says God has had false beliefs.
I thought Israel would return to me, but she did not. And her treacherous sister Judah saw it. It's like, that just happens. The biblical authors don't share your concerns. So whatever the system is, it's not biblical theology, it's extra biblical theology. And sure, maybe it represents reality in some fashion, but the Bible authors don't hold to it. They don't think so. Is this so this is why we were talking before we came on air. You're like, yeah, it was that guy a Molinist who like converted to atheism after you? I was like, no, I think it was a Calvinist who converted to Platonism. Like he figured out that the Bible didn't make sense at all with his Platonism. He just converted to Platonism. Like, he's a lot more happy discarding the Bible, because the Bible just ruined all his nice theology that he had. You're like,
it was just dead weight for trying to make his Platonism work.
You don't even need the Bible. You just abandon the Bible. You could have your own theology. You could be whatever you want. It could be whatever you want.
Okay, so it is Boyd. Yes, it is Boyd. What Boyd says in response is that no, God being surprised doesn't indicate a false belief. And then he basically argues this. He says God didn't believe.
It's semantics. It's a word definition. Like, you could call it a false belief. It might be the non-central fallacy. Normal people might not call it a false belief. It just depends on the circumstances. But again, Language
so
is
this is just
inspecific.
posturing for rhetoric then.
Yeah, so it's like you have emotional weight that's attached to these words, and Boyd doesn't want to go out and say, "Oh, God held a false belief," or "God made a mistake." It's like, well, you could call it that. It's like these classifications are in fact subjective. There's not an objective meaning assigned to all these words that count at the margins for everything. It's like these are classifications. Like,
Yeah, the Bible was not actually written as a systematic theology.
right. And as we talked before, language just doesn't work in that way, in which language represents it's the referential fallacy to pretend that language represents the real world on some sort of one-to-one basis.
Yeah. Which is kind of a Platonist idea.
It's what?
It's almost a Platonist idea to think of language that way.
Yeah, like there's a realm of the ideas, and all ideas are perfectly represented in the ether, and so that like our language can be perfect. And so you think about Diogenes, Plato's like, a man is a featherless bipod, and then Diogenes runs in with the plucked chicken, and he's like, "Behold, a man!" And then Plato's like, a featherless bipod with flat nails. Like, okay. Definitions are loose, and they're just for understanding. They're not. They don't represent reality on some sort of one-to-one
One of the
basis.
reasons these large language model AIs really struggle to think beyond just like reconstructing common phrases and common images and stuff. It'd be worth showing you some examples, but if you try to give it enough commands where it has to think about what it's doing, it can't figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard.
Adam will do X tomorrow. God believed it is highly probable Adam will do X tomorrow. And his surprise is not an indication that he had a false belief, but an indication that it's a reaction to the improbable thing happening. So note on open theism, if Board is correct, then God doesn't even have beliefs about what we will do. He only has beliefs about the probabilities of what we will do. That's the only way you can save God from having false beliefs. And if he wants to go that route, then I would say, yes, we can know things that God cannot, or that God chooses.
Yeah, so they want to win on technicalities of language.
Yeah,
that's what I'm gaining from this.
Not to know or make a claim. So God is agnostic until that thing happens, so to speak.
That's. I'd love to follow that trail a little bit further, but I want to rewind back into the grounding objection a little bit here, because Warren offered three possibilities for how Molinists would try to get around the grounding possession, the grounding objection, and he actually pitted you and Tim not against each other, but with different groundings, right? So he said that Tim argued for this grounding to be in the human's essence, and then he argued that, or he said that Eric said it was in God's nature, and so he brought up those two things. So the question then is, and we can't play all of those clips because again it's a 50-minute video, but the question then is, first of all, is the position as he articulated it the one that you hold? And number two, how would you then communicate it? And that goes to both of you. So we could start with Tim, and then.
Do you mind if I take a? Yeah, let me take.
Go for it.
Maybe 2 or 3. Kind of unpack this thing. First, I want to say that in my book, I don't know if I put it in my first edition. I know it's in my second edition. I point out
he's like, in my book, buy my book.
I know. He's said his book like 10 to 15 times.
Yeah. It's like I might actually have to buy his book and review it. So maybe his advertising might work.
Yeah, if you want to give him money, that's fine.
Well, I don't know. How much is his book?
It's probably not a big deal.
I hope it's not much, Tim Stratton.
It's probably not. I actually expect that he's not making much money off of it. Even I have to wonder how many people hear him say this and think, okay, I'm going to go buy his book now.
Right.
He's probably already got a captured audience, right? So everyone who's going to buy it has already bought it.
Well, let's go look him up on Amazon real quick. Stratton, Tim. Oh, the thing about books is you don't actually want to make your book super cheap or free because people value what they pay for something. So if you're in photography, you want to charge more rather than less. People are going to value those pictures more. If you're charging like $100 for all your photography and giving them all the prints or whatever, they're just going to be like, and then they'll be more demanding. And so if you charge them like $1,000, then they'll be very appreciative for all the pictures that they're getting, and they'll be less demanding, and they'll value those pictures a lot more. These are $1,000 pictures. And so when you have books, you don't want to make your book free necessarily. I share my book for free on Academia, but I actually have it priced like 10, $20.
Got one for $40.
Is it?
One, like he's got a couple books actually. It's not just one.
No. Oh, you know what? You know what we're gonna do? Matt Slick, he wrote a fiction book, and so we'll have to do a podcast where we read through his fiction book.
Maybe that's where his genius lies.
Oh, like his main character is like some 40-year-old guy, like guaranteed self-insert. It's so funny. Oh, no. I'm like, is this you, Matt Slick? Are you the main character of your book? Oh. Yeah, so we'll have to do that. So let's see. Divine Knowledge, Mere Molinism Study Guide, $10. And then he's got a paperback for $40.
But the Kindle price is 10.
Okay, so that's good. And so
hard copy of his book, so you can just keep it in the background of your videos.
Well, depending on how many pages it is, $40 might be good. So it's 328 pages. I think I got like a 500-page book that I price at like $20 because you can't price it at 10 because of just the printing costs or whatever.
Yeah, 4.7 stars out of 5.
Yeah, and he's got like 100 reviews. So people apparently like Molinists have the money to shell out, and then like keep that going.
Time and money.
I got to write a book on Molinism, and then I'll make the big bucks. But yeah, so he does peddle his book quite a lot.
Okay. I point out that a statement is true if it corresponds to the way things are, the way things were, the way things will be, or the way things would have been if things were different. And so that's just a more precise, modal aware version of the correspondence theory of truth. And truth corresponds not just to actuality, but also to past, future, and even counterfactual reality. So let me give you a step-by-step breakdown here of the grounding debate. And let's walk through the grounding objection, or through how the grounding objection tries and I think fails to evolve into something.
So this is like a response to Warren McGru's video, and they played like 3 seconds of Warren talking.
Yeah. I was just about to say, I have not seen Warren for a while.
This is an interesting response video. I guess, Warren, you've been refuted.
He's
convincing.
He's what?
Yeah, he said grounding, and so they got all they need to know.
They just go with it.
Warren, you are done. Did Warren even say grounding?
Yeah. No, he did. I don't think he did. I think they brought it up, and then they started like talking about it. Like they did like 3 seconds of Warren talking. Warren, you're done. You're finished. Your video has been refuted.
So first, truth must be grounded in currently existing things. That's a claim. So an example, or that's a claim that I often get from open theists, that truth must be grounded in currently existing things. So for example, in my book, I say Jones is eating eggs, right? Jones is eating eggs is true because Jones exists and is doing the thing, right? Jones is doing the eating of eggs, right? So if Jones is eating eggs, then it's true that Jones is eating eggs. Now that sounds intuitive, and that's what grounds that truth, right? Until you ask the next question. Well, what about past truths? So for example, Socrates no longer exists. Well, this is clearly true, but Socrates doesn't exist right now. And so the principle must expand and say, well, truth can be grounded in past things too. So then that leads to the next question. Well, what about future truths? And
He didn't say anything that would. I don't know what his point was with that second point.
Because Socrates no longer exists.
Yeah,
so
but what's the statement?
That necessitates that there's some truth that exists that Socrates used to exist. And so the truth value of past events must exist in some fashion.
But that exists. I mean, the fact that Socrates doesn't exist, it doesn't actually necessarily mean he existed in the past.
No, the way he phrased it, Socrates no longer exists. Therefore, there must be some truth value remnants from the past which carry over to actually ground that and have current truth values to point to the truth that Socrates no longer exists. And so in classical theism, God is outside of time, so all truths exist all at once, forever and always.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other ways where truth of past events can still currently exist. Some sort of like growing block theory of time, in which time keeps expanding and all past events get lumped into this whole in which this truth value set just keeps growing the more that reality happens, the more that time progresses, growing block. And so in that way, past events might currently exist in some fashion to get this. But again, all this stuff is based on very specific definitions of knowledge. The knowledge that they want is knowledge that corresponds to existing truth values, which is not the normal way knowledge is used. It's the way that philosophers like to use the word knowledge, and then they'll switch between our normal definition of knowledge as it's convenient to them.
Mm-hmm.
Eric brought this up already about it raining. And so if somebody says it will rain in Spain 10 years from now. Now, if that's true, it's true now, but nothing currently grounds it. So now the objector says, okay, well, truth can be grounded in future things also. Okay, well, what about non-existence? For example, unicorns do not exist. Okay, well, that's true, but there are no unicorns, past, present, or future. So the principle must allow truth can be grounded in the fact of non-existence as well. So which brings us to our fifth and final point here, which is the final and
unless someone classifies that as a nonsensical statement because it's a reference to things that don't actually exist or only exist in ideological sets that doesn't have physical manifestation. David says there are unicorns in the Bible. Well, there is in certain translations, depending on what translation you want. King James uses the word unicorn.
Most coherent view, and I say also the Molinist solution, is what's really doing the grounding isn't a concrete object at all. It's the fact or state of a.
So the idea that it's going to rain in 10 years is grounded off of historical experience projecting forward.
No. So I think his example is it's going to rain on May 5th at 10 a.m. 2035. I think that's what he's going for, like a very specific, time specific, to the detail, truth value of what will happen in the future.
But who's saying that? Like, I don't know if anyone's actually like, you're not going to claim that.
I'm not, but
so who's he talking to?
He might be referencing the fact that some open theists say that God has this type of knowledge of the future is partially open and partially closed, and the closed events he knows with certainty, and he might be criticizing the open theist definition of those closed events in the future. But again, I think all this whole thing stems.
I think just about everyone who isn't believing in the future in some way is going to disagree with him on that point. Right? Like, you're not going to go to the famous atheist philosophers and find them agreeing with him on that point.
Well, he's criticizing other systems. He's saying if knowledge is based in Truthmakers And if God has this type of knowledge in which something 10 years down the road
It's knowable.
is knowable using this
currently
knowledge, then that thing 10 years down the road has to have a truth maker if the truth maker thing is correct. But if it doesn't have a truth maker, then your truth maker criticisms of Molinism are ungrounded. It's a tu quoque fallacy where he's like, we have a grounding problem, you have a grounding problem too. It's like, yeah, maybe both systems have a grounding problem. And so the solution is that, like, the future doesn't exist except for in hopes and possibilities, probabilities. And when God has certainty of future event, it's not this 100% unfalsifiable certainty. It's just the normal way we use certain. I'm certain that I'm going to get some good sleep tonight. And so it's going to happen.
That's what the alcohol is for.
Well, the alcohol I get sleepy when I drink. I don't get like it's time for a nap.
I think that's what everyone it's known to be a depressant. I don't understand how people get more and more wild when they drink a lot. It's like, you just want to fall asleep.
It's time to act out and be crazy and like violent. I'm like, okay, it's.
You see those studies where they made people think they were drinking alcohol and they started acting out.
Well, yeah. So one thing alcohol does is it brings out the true you. So it does drop inhibitions a little bit. So drunk you is the real you.
I don't know if the real you is drunk. You without inhibitions isn't really you, is it?
Well, it's you without. So. Was it Jean Satir had this idea that when people are being observed by other people, they act differently than if they're on their own. Like if I'm in the car.
Okay, but you on your own is not necessarily who you are. A lot of who you are is defined by how you interact with people.
All right. But anyways, when you drop those inhibitions of being observed by other people, you
become a different person.
Become a different person.
Yeah.
Anyways, the point is I sing in the car in front of my children and they get to hear me sing.
Whether they like to or not.
They don't. But
no libertarian free will on that decision.
I didn't ask them permission.
If Jones had grown up in Germany, he would have learned French, right? This is true because it corresponds to the counterfactual fact that this would be so. So we revise the principle one last time to get this. A true contingent proposition is true in virtue of the fact that some object exists, did exist, will exist, does not exist, or would exist under specific conditions.
Are just probabilistic
so unless someone...
truths.
If
Jones is going to learn French, okay, maybe, unless, I don't know, he gets mugged and then changes his whole trajectory.
Right. In his example,
probabilistic truth.
The guy doesn't actually think the guy learns French in his example.
He's saying it's a hypothetical.
Right. No, but
I'm saying even the hypotheticals are probabilistic.
I don't. Molinism doesn't deal with probabilities, and so I think he's saying just conceptually, because the guy could do something else, it proves some sort of point of his about grounding. So we'll let him finish out this point.
And I explained this in my book. Unless somebody can show that this final version is less plausible than all the previous versions, then it seems to me the grounding objection is going to collapse. But here's the much simpler option.
Okay, we're going to rewind a few seconds. Boop, 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 and then rehear that.
Specific conditions. So unless someone, and I explained this in my book, unless somebody can show that the conditions don't affect at all, it's the fact or state of affairs. If Jones had grown up in Germany, he would have learned French, right? This is true because it corresponds to the counterfactual fact that this would be so. So we revise the principle one last time to get this. A true contingent proposition is true in virtue of the fact that some object exists, did exist, will exist, does not exist, or would exist under specific conditions. So unless someone, and I explained this in my book, unless somebody can show that this final version is less plausible than all the previous versions, then it seems to me the grounding objection is going to collapse.
Okay, so yeah, so he's going for Molinism, and so he wants to slip in some sort of contingent truth that has zero possibility of ever actualizing. And so this is his goal here, to say this grounding objection doesn't work because it can be applied to these conditionals. Yeah, that's what Molinism's all about. Maybe something like that. I might be missing something. French is a depressant.
But here's the much simpler option. Even if somebody doesn't want to follow all that philosophical machinery, there's a much easier answer here, and that's just to reject Truthmaker maximalism altogether. And that's what philosophers like Trenton Merrick's, who's got a great book on this, Jonathan Talent and Ryan Mullins do. On their view, truth doesn't require a metaphysical truth maker. It just needs to correspond to reality, whether actual, past, future, or possible. So then, what grounds CCFs and Molinism? Well,
so the problem with that is using their definition of knowledge. If God has knowledge of the future, what does that mean? Is that only judged ex post facto? In their system, not talking about open theism, in their system, when they say God has knowledge of the future, and guess what? That this knowledge is unfalsifiable, it must occur, nothing else can occur or will occur. Do we only call that knowledge after those events occur and they correspond to something? Or in what sense are we calling that knowledge of the future? That's the question. And I'm not hearing an answer for that.
Okay, so it's much more than just saying it's the
Can you
nature.
explain that a little further? I might be missing what
So
that means.
So he's saying in the Truthmaker theory, there has to be some sort of something that makes anything that God knows actually be true. So has to be some existing truth value that corresponds. If God knows the future, there has to be a present truth value that God has access to that corresponds to that future truth. He's saying that no, we only judge ex post facto. If God knows what I'm going to do tomorrow, like he really doesn't know it right now. We only judge after I do it tomorrow, that because it corresponded to a truth that will exist in the future, now it's considered knowledge because it corresponded to what was actual, even though they called it knowledge before it actually corresponded to anything with the truth value that exists.
I don't know if he's not saying that though. He's saying it's true whether or not it happens or not.
I'm not defending what he's saying. He's saying that God has.
So you're just trying to describe what he's saying, right?
God has knowledge that doesn't necessarily correspond to any truth value, and we only judge that it's a truth value after the fact. I think he literally just said that. We'll rewind 15 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Let's see. I'm going to say that again.
A metaphysical truth maker. It just needs to correspond to reality, whether actual, past, future, or possible. So
it only has to correspond. God's knowledge, in order to be knowledge, only has to correspond to reality, whether past, present, future, or possible. And so at what point...
That's him describing those other books, though, right? That's not him describing his position.
No, this is him describing his position. He's saying he rejects Truthmaker theory.
Oh, he actually agrees to reject Truthmaker theory.
Yes. And so he's saying that you could replace it with this ex post facto look to see if God's knowledge of the future corresponds to that future. And then God had knowledge ex post facto. Like, okay, sure, but how did God? This avoids the real problem of determinism and how God is subject to fate and all of reality is subject to fate. How does God know unfalsifiably what will happen in the future without error 100%? It's like there must be some sort of way he has access to this knowledge.
So this is still a grounding objection then.
And
You want to know where the grounds are for understanding these things.
right. And if all my decisions are known before I ever exist, there's no basis for saying I'm the originator of these decisions. It can't be. That's impossible.
Then what grounds CCFs and
Well, he wants an argument and he doesn't want assertions. It's impossible for my decisions to be known before I exist to make them, because I don't exist to make them, so they can't be my decisions. It can't be specific to me making those decisions. That's why my free decisions.
Well, that's why I was very curious about going that metaphysical route. Can you be copied?
Right.
Are you identical to a simulation of you?
Right. So this is why we started this podcast. I said free will, if it exists, has to be indistinguishable on some level from randomness. Yeah. So let's say I am copied, and both of us will have the same inputs, and then we have different results.
Have different results. Yeah.
Either randomness exists or free will exists, or both. And
Right.
fatalism, determinism, Molinism, Calvinism, all of these things are false if that's true. And so if we are not just the product of our inputs, then randomness or
So in other words, we're not answering the question whether or not you can be copied, but Molinism depends on believing that you can be copied.
yes, Molinism is the soma running individuals through simulations to get exact results. The soma model. We're not using Marvel. We're using actual critically acclaimed.
And it's a legit question to sort of ask where this grounding is coming from, because then it really is like there's a huge metaphysics, a huge ontology behind this epistemology that they're making about what human beings really are.
Yeah.
Molinism. Well, okay, so it's much more than just saying it's the nature of a person or God's nature. Those things are combined. But here's the combo of what grounds CCFs. If we're going to say it requires a grounding, we're going to say it's God's essential and necessary omniscience, number one. Two, the essence of possible agents that an omnipotent God could create. And then finally, the truth of what they would freely do in certain circumstances. So God...
He thinks we're just computer programming. He thinks that we are just a series of functions that you could run simulations through.
Yeah, so you can be copied.
You could be copied.
Doesn't make these truths true. He simply knows them because of who he is, a perfect, maximally great being. And what the creature would freely do, he knows these if created and placed in freedom-permitting situations. So bottom line, as I explained to James White in our debate, who was ironically trying to make the same case as Warren here is, and those two usually aren't on the...
That was a terrible, terrible debate. I don't know if you watched that debate.
Should I want to watch that debate?
Don't watch that debate. And so here's a summary of the debate. It's like Tim Stratton was trying to be all buddy and complimentary to White, and White was just hated Stratton and just treating him miserably. And then Stratton's over there making Marvel references. I'm like, what is going on here? It's just stop. Don't lick James White's boot. James White hates you. He hates you. Don't show him difference. Don't show him respect. You're dealing with someone who absolutely hates your guts. Oh man, it was bad. I was like, Tim Stratton. Then he kept doing Marvel stuff, and everyone's like, well, no, stop, no Marvel, no. We don't want to talk about Doctor Strange. That was the debate.
The same side of things. But if God is, and I said this to White and I'll say it to Warren now, if God is necessarily omniscient and omnipotent, a maximally great being.
So here's the thing that the Molinists also do. He just said that God is necessarily omniscient. Well, okay. Necessary means you can't be otherwise. In their model. Omniscient means that he has access to all these future truth values unfalsifiably. If both those things are true, then God doesn't actually make a decision between possible futures. so they have to say that there's a logical moment where God makes this decision, but there's never a moment in time where there's a decision to actualize the current world. So he never actually does make a decision between possibilities. His omniscience is necessary and non-contingent. He might not be using this is what Molinists believe. He might not be talking about this specific principle right here in this clip, but God has this necessary omniscience, which contingently has all these non-necessary truth values in it. So it's a very contradictory claim about what omniscience entails, what the object of that omniscience is, how God obtains that, and they don't think he obtains any knowledge, because that's open theism, God learning, which they've already said was terrible. And so then they try to arbitrary category create and say it's a logical moment in which God made this decision. So there was never actually a time where he didn't know what would be created unfalsifiably, but it is not necessary because we can imagine other worlds that could have been created, although they really couldn't have been created.
I don't like, if you're a Calvinist, you could easily say God knows all kinds of possible worlds he could have made in those realities too, right? Like there's a obviously an open theist could say God could make a billion different worlds. God could even make any number of worlds that he has complete control over and complete knowledge over. Like these things are not exclusive to Molinism, and so I guess the only thing you're getting out of Molinism is trying to assign blame to God. That's the only special secret you're going to get. The secret sauce where somehow God both created a deterministic world but is not responsible for it.
All right. So Japheth over here says, why do we use the word randomness? I'm open theist. I think using the word decision, generation, ability creates a new meaning, is not random and is not determined. Yeah, you might be misunderstanding me. When I say if free will, if it exists, it has to be, it's indistinguishable from randomness. It means I'm saying that there's not going to be a way to tell whether it is free will or whether it is randomness. Like if free will exists, we wouldn't, randomness may or may not exist, but we wouldn't be able to tell the difference between free will and randomness if either exists, if that makes sense. And so we're not using the word randomness as if it must exist or necessarily exists or is the equivalent of free will. It's just not something you're going to be able to ferret out, if that makes sense.
Then middle knowledge comes along for the ride for free. It just comes along. It happens, right? As I explained in my forthcoming second edition, the middle knowledge is a logical consequence of affirming God's maximal greatness. And like I said, I'll get into the ontological argument in the book as well. But an omnipotent God has the power to create libertarian free creatures, and Warren would agree with that. And an omniscient God knows what these free creatures would choose to do in freedom permitting circumstances within an omnipotent God's power to actualize, even if God never created it. That's just middle knowledge. So bottom line, the grounding objection either assumes too much, Truthmaker maximalism, demands more than Molinism needs to work, or completely misunderstands what Molinism actually claims. And in all three cases, it fails. So, Eric, would you add any?
Well, are you convinced? Molinists, they tend to be intelligent people who are very much driven by this rhetoric and their inability to see logical implications of their own system. And they seem to be oblivious to the counter arguments against it. That's the exact same thing as determinism, fatalism. Even God is subject to this fatalism. And so that they'll go through this denial in which you're trying to engage them on some of the basics of their own theology, and they'll violate their own premises. I'm gonna have to go find that little cartoon that I drew, kind of mocking Molinism. I don't know, but wherever that exists.
I mean, they are hyperlogical and going through, like Calvinism, by the way, the extreme orthodox Calvinist position is also hyperlogical, which is why all these characteristics of simplicity and aseity and the O's and the I's came about. But you cannot help but see that they are also very emotionally attached to these ideas. Their dignum Deo is driving a huge amount of why they're pushing this.
So here is one of my cartoons. This is what's funny. So it's like me talking to William Lane Craig. I'm a Molinist. We believe both that God knows the future and that man has free will. This is because God sees all possible results. Any free will action also knows which actions will be taken. You get the best of both worlds. And I say, you realize that this logically breaks down for the same reason any sci-fi movie fails, right? Can God tell someone what the future will be? And then that person change the future that God knows will happen? And like in the middle of this, he starts singing, "You get the best of both worlds." This is a Miley Cyrus song from it's what's her hit thing? Hannah Montana. You get the best of both worlds, chill it out, take it slow, then you rock out the show. I'm over here like, hello, are you listening to me? You get the best of both worlds, mix it all together, and you know it's the best. Like, are you still there? Like, you get the best. Oh man. And so I have to get the other one that I did, but it's like these things fall apart under like some basic.
That's why he won't tell anyone what the future is.
Oh yeah.
Except the times that telling people is what's going to bring about the future.
Monday. I gotta find the actual one with the flowchart. And the flowchart actually, it's like I've had like so many conversations with Molinists. Not so more nowadays, but I used to have conversations with Molinists all the time. It's just like, oh man, this is just tedious. Mm-hmm. Oh man, so many funny stuff. I'll find it. We'll put them on. We'll let them talk a little bit more. This is not it. This is my. I just went to God is Open and I typed in Mean Monday, and so it's got to be somewhere here in this scrolling.
We'll just find it eventually. Yeah, okay.
We will just keep. We will spend 3 hours scrolling through various memes. Oh, here's a good one. Oh no, James White lost his Bible. Can you help him find it? And then there's the different reacts for Facebook. It's like the Enneads, the Nagamarada, the ESV, and then his own picture.
His favorite.
Oh no, I've died. Okay, so we will go back to our. They haven't played Warren at all. Warren,
it's been half an hour of their time, which means we've played half an hour of their time, right?
Yeah, we're not getting very far either.
Anymore about the grand,
but we've played more of them per capita.
For sure.
Per capita that they have a Warren.
Pending objection.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate one thing and then add something else. Yeah, so as you mentioned, just to kind of explain that just a little bit more, that I've already alluded to and that you just kind of unpack further, is just that if in Craig's new systematic philosophical theology book, he uses an argument, or not an argument, he references something someone said about like 3 propositions.
All right, so I do got the flowchart meme. All I had to do was search flowchart on the God is Open site, and surprise, surprise, it's a share screen and Molinist flowchart. Here's the Molinist flowchart. Can God tell me what color shirt I will, and then I capitalized will, so that because they'll try to weasel out of what I'm talking about, what I will wear tomorrow. And then can I choose to wear a different color shirt? So it's like the Cassandra complex. So Cassandra in Greek mythology was someone who could foretell the future, but had no power to change it. And so in Molinism, the same thing's true. So if God knows what will happen, then it must happen.
But you always wear the same color shirt, right?
Well, yeah. Not always. I have a picture of myself just today in a different color shirt.
Oh,
So,
very unique.
yeah. I was requested specifically to wear a different color shirt. Because apparently black is not flattering to my skin tone. And so there's different answers. There's yes and no. And then there's the third answer that the Molinists always give. So if they say no, then fatalism is true. So if my knowledge of the future renders me impossible to change that future, then I'm fated in some sense. And this is like just a common sense thing. Like I could choose what color shirt to wear. Yes, if he can tell me that, well, then God didn't tell me what color shirt I will wear. Like the definition.
Right. So yes is actually just an incoherent answer.
Yeah, it's incoherent. So the question is asking is, can God tell me unfalsifiably what future will actualize with the color shirt I choose? And then can I choose to actualize a different future? If you're answering yes, you just don't understand the question. It's just, yeah, it's like, who am I dealing with here? Then there's their not normal answer, which is another incoherent answer with explanation. Yes, but God would know what different color shirt you would choose as a result. And so the answer is, then God didn't tell me what color shirt I will wear. You answered a completely different question than the one asked. You answered, can God tell me what color shirt I would wear in absence of telling me what color shirt I will wear? Refer back to the actual question. And so Molinism fails for the same reason any time travel movie fails. All time travel movies are internally incoherent, and they fall apart under basic examination because time travel's not real. You can't travel into the past. You can't travel in the future. You can't have
the only way time travel works is if you're always generating new universes. But that's not really time travel. It's universe travel.
Even someone pointed out that 12 Monkeys works because it's a closed loop. But even when you're watching 12 Monkeys, it's a progressing timeline. That timeline might loop infinitely or something like that, but it's still a progressing timeline. But time travel movies fail because there's not a logical way they could correspond to reality. You can't have causes precede effects and things like that. It just doesn't work. So back to the show.
One is that it will rain tomorrow, and let's say this was uttered on Tuesday, and then on Thursday, the person utters it rained yesterday. Now there is nothing in reality, as you point out, for this to correspond to. And on Wednesday, if they say it has rained today, that's true, but how is that? How are the other two false? Talking about in the future or the past. And what Craig says here is basically that whatever grounded those past tense truths and that present tense truth is going to ground the same thing as a future tense truth. So if you're going to grant that those things are grounded, as you mentioned, even though those things don't exist, then you're going to have to grant that they ground it for the other tense statements as well. Also, you alluded to going back to maximal great being theology, perfect being theology. When you look at the definition of omniscience, middle knowledge is just entailed by the definition of omniscience. By definition,
God has all this extra knowledge of things that have a 0% chance of actually ever happening. Like I guess God has a bunch of useless nonsense knowledge that doesn't correspond to any truth or reality. I guess that's what omniscience means. I guess.
Full actualized knowledge is knowing everything that even everything that cannot be.
Yeah,
is what you know.
All sorts of cannot happen events is in God's knowledge, and that's what omniscience is.
That it's so infinite. It's as many infinities of impossibilities. It's like, what's the Red Queen's like? I imagine 5 impossible things before breakfast.
God ran an infinite number of impossible scenarios through his head and has knowledge of all those infinite number of impossible scenarios. That's what omniscience means. That's just what omniscience entails. Ugh.
In omniscience, a being is omniscient if and only if he knows all true propositions and doesn't believe any false ones. Let's just put it that way. Well, you have present tense propositions. Today I'm talking with Tim. You have past tense propositions. Yesterday I talked with Tim. You have future tense propositions. Tomorrow I'll talk to Tim. And then you have counterfactual propositions. So
Chris Jones points out, apparently the definitions of terms necessitate what God must be like. Yeah, so since they are self-admittedly into perfect being theology, they think that this armchair philosophizing has any effect or correspondence with reality. I think that people tend to be ridiculous, and so people's value sets that they try to impose on reality is just a bunch of nonsense. But I don't know, that's just me.
It feels almost like they're doing this J.R.R. Tolkien thing where he pretends that he's talking about real historical events, even though he's making it all up on the fly. I'm just reading and learning about what's happened. and wouldn't it be like it's all cool and stuff, but wouldn't it be even more cool if this was really true? Come on, guys. It couldn't be as great as if it was really true, and because that makes it so great, it has to be true.
So hyper historical reality is the idea that whatever historical reality is the coolest is that which exists, and a history, whatever history is the best. And so since a history that exists, a cool history that exists is better than a cool history that doesn't exist, the coolest history must exist.
Yeah, the perfect history.
The perfect history theology.
Yeah.
Tim didn't exist, and I wouldn't be talking to him or something to that effect. Now, given that these are all propositions, and by definition, omniscience entails that a being knows all true propositions, well, then a counterfactual proposition is true or false, given the principle of bivalence, well, then God has to know them. And again, this is why I said in the beginning,
listen, our words have very specific definitions, and God has to meet these definitions.
This is why the open theist has to make those two moves. You're going to have to present some grounding objection to kind of save face, if you will, as to why God doesn't meet that definition of omniscience, and then on top of that, redefine omniscience in modal terms, which I think is a mistake.
That's good. Have we sufficiently answered the grounding objection here?
Have we?
You guys, anything that's occurred before?
Can we play Warren some more?
Can Warren be allowed to make his objection?
Where is Warren? I'm scrolling through it. Let's see. They're still not playing him. Okay, so we're at 36 minutes. I'm not seeing it. Maybe there was a little flash on the screen. It's probably Tim Stratton moving because he's mostly like a statue. No. They still don't play him.
No more.
So
they're done. I think they.
There he is. At 47 minutes, they play him again.
How long? And then they're gone. They're done after that.
You have been refuted, Warren.
We've told you what you're gonna say, and we've also told you why it's wrong.
Warren, why did you even make your video? You stupid man.
Warren termed as functional determinism.
I'll just say that I am having a really hard time hearing both of you guys. I must be having problems with my internet service, but can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm
just going to fast forward to Warren real quick because I would like to see what they play. Is it just the very next like 3 seconds and then they cut them off again? They're like, we're going to go through. I don't know how long Warren's video is. They're like going through 3 seconds at a time.
in the comments section, and I'll be sure to star them and make sure they are taken care of. So here is the video that we're going to play. Functional determinism. This is what Warren has to say.
Where God surveys
Judging from the clip they're playing, Warren's video is like an hour long. We've heard like 3 seconds of it.
possible worlds based on these supposed counterfactuals, and he chooses which world to actualize. But then once he does this, everything within that world becomes fixed. It's locked in. The individual doesn't determine the outcome. God's choice of what world he actualized is what determines the outcome. Now, under the Molinist view, the moment God chooses to actualize a world, the entire timeline of that world becomes settled. And that includes every choice of every creature at every moment. So even though the creature is said to have freely chosen something, the outcome was locked in by God's prior decision to actualize this world.
So I think Warren is missing the crucial point that if human beings exist in a way where you can run these simulations and get precise, unfalsifiable results, then the decision's not coming from the people. And so it's not that God is locking in all our decisions. It's our decisions don't come from ourselves. They are just a product of environment. And so I think this is a very valuable point that Warren, I haven't watched Warren's hour-long video. Maybe he talks about this somewhere, and maybe they're being very selective here. But I think that that's a critical point. And so he might be opening himself up to some criticism by the way he's describing things. They'll say, oh, you're misrepresenting us. We think this nuanced other thing instead.
Creature didn't determine the outcome. The outcome was already true before the creature ever existed. And that's what we mean by functional determinism. The creature's choice is functionally determined by God's act of creation. Now,
okay, so we need to stress the point that the creature's decision does not come from the creature because it's been fatalistically known before the creature even exists to make that. And so if God's running these simulations, then human beings only operate by mechanistic principles and have no internal volition to actually make these decisions. That seems to be the more critical point.
They may not be forced, but they cannot do otherwise in the world God chose to create. So here we see Molinism as a variation of theistic determinism and compatibilism. And this functional determinism undercuts the Molinists' attempt to preserve libertarian freedom.
I think the only reason they're watching
Hey, Tim's back.
is because Tim left and they couldn't talk to each other.
Yeah. Okay, time to play some more Warren.
Yes, thank you. I don't know what to do. Let's just play Warren and watch him.
Okay. Let's play this small clip that's easier to respond to.
Yeah.
Hey, what's going on? What'd I miss?
Did you
missed the actual part that you're supposed to be here to respond to?
Yeah.
To Stratton.
He doesn't care.
He could just, he's like, I'll respond to it anyways.
It's like, I will tell you what Warren said.
We will talk about my other things.
Did you see any of that clip there?
Just the very end of it. Summarize
Okay,
it for me.
So this is Warren's explanation of functional determinism and the idea that when God actualized this particular world, every single action, every single thing that people would do was fixed in place.
Oh yeah.
Once he made that, once he actualized this world, and
I think Molinist, I think Tim Stratton actually describes it as like indeterministic determinism. I think he uses these words, and I think Warren quotes him or something. I don't know, and so it'll be interesting to see. I haven't actually gotten this far in actually reviewing this actual video. I only was in like 20 minutes, so I don't know how he's going to respond, but it'll be interesting. Hitting play.
And so it's really just theistic determinism with a free will mask on. That's kind of like the vision he had there. Did I summarize that well, Eric? Or
Yeah, I think so. And I to quote him too, because I have the transcript pulled up.
Yeah.
He goes on to say, if you can't choose X in this world because this is the world God actualized, and your libertarian freedom is an illusion. So one is assuming you can't do otherwise, which he hasn't given an argument for that. He's just asserting that.
Okay, so
that's what they claim, though. You can't do otherwise.
well, you actually can't do otherwise. I think I have a quote from Tim Stratton. Maybe I need to go to my memes, and then I need to search for Stratton and see what comes up, because I got him on record saying things like this, very not damning. I don't know if that's the right word to use. Very critical quotes from him, just exposing what he actually believes about these things. And so maybe I'll see. No items match. Okay. Okay. Here's one. Okay. I'm going to put this on the screen. This is a quote that I have from Tim Stratton. I got off of Facebook and I said, "Oh, thanks for telling me that. Can I quote you on this?" And he says, like, "Go ahead, quote me on this, because this is what they actually believe." And Tim Stratton, my interactions with him, this is what I got out of it. I'm going to quote him. And so he's interacting with a guy called Timothy Fox. I don't know, I'm doxing people, I guess. "The knowledge possessed by a maximally great being is perfect. It will never be falsified by definition, since knowledge includes truth, and truth can't be falsified." So that's my Stratton quote. And so God's knowledge of what we will do cannot be falsified. We cannot.
We have to do it.
We cannot do otherwise, despite what he says in his little podcast here. Oh, we could do other. It can't be falsified. Well, God knows we will.
Because when they say you could do otherwise, there's just a 0% chance, but you could do it.
It just 0% can never happen, but you can do it.
Yeah.
It can never happen, but you could do
it.
And then he goes on to say, "Recall you're just left with a metaphysical sleight of hand. You were free to choose A or B, but God chose the one where you would choose A, so B was never actually possible. But you're still free. That's not freedom. That's just post-selection." So here's another assumption that's going on. Is he's failing to, he's unintentionally perhaps strawmanning or misrepresenting Molinism. And here's why. Let's.
If you don't phrase things the way we phrase them, then you're misrepresenting.
Bring Tim in. Tim, why does God know what I will do tomorrow?
Because he's omniscient.
All right. And
how?
What comes first? Chronologically, his knowing or my doing?
Chronologically, logically, he knows it first before you actually do it. Chronologically, say your question again.
In other words,
is this confusing? This is not a confusing question, right?
It's not a confusing question.
He wasn't paying attention, or maybe he's actually falling into a trap of his own philosophy.
Like, are they trapping themselves? Maybe Eric Hernandez is. I don't know who's talking.
No,
about.
I don't think Eric is trying to trap him, but maybe.
Yeah, but he's accidentally doing it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's what's happening.
It's an unintentional trap. Like, I'm asking the wrong questions.
Yeah.
Because here's what Warren's going to get at is he's going to make a mistake.
Wait, answer the question first.
And I can find the quote. He says that.
He's like, Tim Stratton's like, "Oh, a hostile question. Wow. Oh, I got what? Wait, what was the question again?"
That God, in terms of logical priority, my action is going to, what I will do is logically prior to God knowing it. In other words, would you agree that God knows what I will do because that's in fact what I would do?
He's like, here's the answer I'm looking for. Do you agree with that answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So why does God know that I will do X? Because that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
Right. So my decision, even though I don't exist, God knows my decision, and it's because of my decision that God.
Okay, so he's saying our decisions are logically prior to God knowing those decisions. But it seems to be this Soma style.
I don't even know what that means, logically prior.
Because they don't want to say chronologically.
I know they don't, because if they said chronologically, they would say God had to have learned what we were going to do.
Logically prior is
because learning happens through time, right?
Right, but they want to arbitrary category create in order to get around massive problems with their theology, and so they create a nonsense
prior is a nonsense idea, though, right?
It is nonsense. 100% it's nonsense. Their metaphysics is H.L. Mencken, organized nonsense. Well, God logically, prior to actualizing this world, made a decision about which world to actualize, although there's no potential in God's actualization. And so God never learned which world would be actualized, or there was never a time where he didn't know what world would be actualized. So he never did gain any knowledge because this was all logical priorities. It's like, you guys, are you guys listening to yourselves talk? You guys hearing this? You guys,
they cannot think outside of ideas of cause and effect, but they want to strip it of time. They want to strip it of the fact that cause and effect happens through time and just pretend it's purely some sequence. But then the sequence is like, how is the sequence actually progressing?
Guys,
it's not progressing in space. It's not progressing in time. What makes the sequence progress?
Guys, God has this attribute, omniscience, in which he knows all things unfalsifiably. Oh, but he also makes a decision which world to actualize. Okay, how do we make these work together? Oh, we'll create logical sequences. In that sense, God can pick between possible worlds, yet still have unfalsifiable knowledge of everything that exists in the future. Oh, you've done it! You've done it! We have solved the problem.
It's just like I don't know. They don't really think through their solutions. They're using word spells that make them feel good.
Category creation, ad hoc category creation. They just we need to solve a problem. Okay, let's just invent something, some words, put some words on the screen. Yeah. It's like, okay, how do we get around the fact that all our view is fatalism? We'll say there's possible other worlds, but they have 0% possibility. But they're still possible worlds. And that way it's not fatalism.
Yeah.
Look, the dice can roll 1 through 5, although 100% of the time it'll roll 6 without fail. You see,
we have a weighted dice, but that doesn't mean anything.
See the dice? The dice has 6 sides.
God knows it. Now, what Warren's going to say is, well, once he creates the world, it's quote unquote locked in. But who's the one that chose to do that? Well, I did. So even if it is quote unquote locked in, and one of the things we touched on where you were gone was
our robot simulation bodies will it's us that's doing our robot simulations and following them to the conclusions that God has picked. So it must be us.
Yeah, I don't think they really understand how much metaphysical reality they're assuming about human nature.
So this is just my normal experience with Molinism. It's organized nonsense. Their categories are all made up. Nothing corresponds to reality. There's internal contradictions. Nothing makes sense, even using their own definitions. It's just It feels like it's a lot of bloviating and obfuscation in order to avoid a lot of logical implications, arbitrary category creation, in order to confuse anyone that they're trying to interact with. And so they're not dealers in reality, truth,
I mean,
practicality.
they're not intentionally trying to confuse the people they interact with. They're doing this to themselves.
Well, yeah, I'm sure.
It's like they're torturing themselves.
And Plato and the Platonists, they thought they were the most brilliant people in the world. They're like, there's a realm of ideas in which all objects exist in some perfect form.
Yeah, we see truth. You know, they mocked the Platonists mocked engineers for being engineers, dealing with such pedantic things.
Sure, you're the smartest people. Okay, there's a realm of ideas. Oh yes.
Yeah.
And if we use contemplative introspection, we can ascend the realm. See truth. Oh, what's this? Plato, you made an allegory of the cave in which I'm depicted as the soy jack looking at shadows, and you're depicted as the Chad ascending into reality.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's like those anime power fantasies. I'm not just a loser high school kid. I jump into giant robots and fight monsters.
Plato's like, you guys are all cave dwellers, and I'm the guy who ascends to the truth. Yeah, he's like, okay, imagine this scenario. You guys are all chained to a wall watching shadows, and I have access to pure truth. Do you get my allegory? Are you guys tracking?
Well, I don't want to be one of those. Tell me more.
You want to be one of those chained guys, or you want to be one of those people seeing the truth, like me, ascending above the physical reality and seeing the realm of the ideals? Oh, Plato.
Sufficient versus
I'm not anti-Plato, but it's funny sometimes.
the necessary condition of libertarian freedom, where if I'm the first mover, I have libertarian freedom. And what I mentioned was, even if I grant Warren's argument that I couldn't have done otherwise, as long as the answer to the question, was I the first mover, is yes, then I have libertarian freedom. But nevertheless, the confusion and misrepresentation here is he's assuming that God.
Okay, so let's try to understand. His definition now of libertarian freedom is who moved it first. Is that what they mean?
It appears to be, in this context, that's what they're going for.
But then, like, a Calvinist is sort of saying the same thing. You're doing what you always wanted to do. So you could almost argue that in a Calvinist conception, we're the first movers.
Well, they are not
desires.
Calvinists are not going to say that. So they're not going to say that God knows because we do. The Calvinist is going to say we do because God chooses us to do, and the Molinist is going to say God knows, as they just said, God knows because we choose to do. That the logical priority is our decision.
The Calvinist isn't talking. Yeah, Calvinist. I'm not saying Calvinist in terms of trying to define God's knowledge. I'm just saying, like, in terms of that definition of free will, it might even fit the Calvinist acceptance. Because he's just going to say that, oh, well, yeah, in a way, you're the first mover because you're doing what you wanted to do.
But I don't think the Calvinists will say that. I think the Calvinists will say God's the first mover.
Why are they attaching? Calvinists attach themselves to the concept of free will. They love using that phrase. So it sounds like it's in some form they want to attach themselves to a notion of your personal responsibility.
I think the difference is that the Calvinists will say our free will is doing whatever is in our maximal desire, which is not super materially different than the Molinist idea that God can run us through iterations to figure out what we're going to do in any situation. Both of them are proposing some sort of mechanistic function of human inward beings. And so in that sense, I think they're the same. But I think the Calvinists will say God's the primary mover, or the Molinists will say we are the primary mover, and God
That's
is.
because the Calvinist is grounded. It doesn't have the grounding problem. The Calvinist says, yeah, God created your script to be as it is. So,
Yeah.
God's knowledge of my action comes logically prior to my decision. Thoughts on that?
No, I think that's. I think you've highlighted the problem there and that presupposition that that he's got. I also like the fact that you brought up. You know, he's using these terms that aren't clearly defined. One thing that I've been.
how do you know? You watched 30 seconds of him.
In the 30 seconds we watched, probably more than 30 seconds, he hasn't defined anything. Why? These are not clear words. Like, as opposed to our very clear definitions.
Especially if you say he's got an hour of talking. It's like maybe he's spent that whole hour defining things. We didn't watch it.
Again, no one will ever know because no one watches Warren's videos. So maybe
Poor
he did or
Warren.
didn't define. Nobody knows.
Poor Warren.
And careful to do is to define all the relevant terms. I've done this in my published writings in my book.
Okay, so I'm gonna just make a bet. How much do we want to bet that he has not defined what necessary means? If something's necessary, if God is necessary, if an event is necessary, does he define being necessary? I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think it's in his book. And so I might be able to take the bet on even terms. But I'll have to get his book. It's $10 and it might be worth looking through and responding to, but I give him his money. I don't know, but I don't think he defines all his terms.
And in academic journal article.
And it is funny. It's if you get my book, all these terms are defined. Just buy the book.
And we're really going after what it means to be determined. And so here's a good definition. An event is determined if antecedent conditions are sufficient to necessitate the event. Determinism, or what I like to refer to avoid confusion.
I think that's a perfectly acceptable definition.
Confusion as exhaustive divine determinism here, or ed, is that God provides the antecedent conditions sufficient to necessitate all events. Now, on Molinism, I go to, us Molinists like to show that God does not determine these things, that we still have libertarian freedom on the Molinist view. But I think Warren would agree, based on the definition of what it means to be determined, that determinism is false on Molinism. That's why he adds the word functional to it. And I don't really see what that word is doing because.
Okay, so
I don't think Warren would agree with that. I don't think so.
Okay, so why does he think that Molinism isn't deterministic? He just said that determinism is when all our choices are based on everything that happens is based on antecedent
events. But he's saying that it's coming from the person. So
right.
It's not an antecedent event because the person is the first mover. But God sees it anyway.
But how is Molinism not determined?
The how is this getting back to a grounding question, which he says you don't need to worry about.
Yeah, just don't worry about it. It just happens to be. It just happens to be that all God's knowledge is unfalsifiable and 100% accurate.
But not predetermined.
But things that happen are not based on antecedent conditions. God just happens to have a correspondence with all our future free will decisions, which themselves are not based on antecedent conditions, but can be known by God antecedently.
Yeah. And it seems like he tries to prove that by saying God can know true things that are hypotheticals, which isn't really a proof of, like, it sounds like a non sequitur. Remember, it's a complete non sequitur. The two things are not related.
And so at Molinism, I think someone stated somewhere on Facebook, just a rando, that Molinism is determinism with extra steps.
Well, yeah, the extra steps are a dance to ensure that you're not called a determinist while pushing it.
Right. They're like, oh, we're not determinists. We just think that everything is 100% unfalsifiable without any variation. Everything. We're not fatalists.
Because if you're just saying, well, that's what predestination is, I'm like, yeah, that's what we're trying to preserve. Predestination without determinism. Warren often will shift the conversation in this video. He's talking about something being determined, but when I think, whether he does this intentionally or not, when he realizes that, okay, but it's not determined on Molinism, then he uses words like locked or fixed or settled or cemented, things like that. Well, what
predestination is? Like,
yeah.
What's your distinction? Predestination without determinism.
Okay, so I'm going to read Tim Stratton again. His quote: "The knowledge possessed by a maximally great being is perfect. It will never be falsified by definition, since knowledge includes truth, and truth can't be falsified. So God knows unfalsifiably all things we will do in the future, and also fatalism isn't true." Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That,
one equals two, trust me. I say it loudly enough.
like, okay, Molinism is so smart.
What does that mean? And I'll say, well, I can agree that it's not. If settled does not mean determined, then sure. But if settled means determined, then no. We're going to disagree with that. So we need one.
How about unfalsifiable? Does that
really,
resonate?
like he's saying you got to define your terms, but then he's making distinctions between predestined and determined. Like, you got to define your terms.
Just use the term unfalsifiable, Stratton. Just say all our future events decisions are unfalsifiable.
Maybe you should say all his arguments are unfalsifiable.
Carefully and philosophically define with precision what each of these words mean, and if they mean the same thing as determined, then just use that word, so we're not going to talk past each other. Otherwise there's going to be a lot of confusion. So I have no problem saying as a Molinist that God can guarantee the future because of his middle knowledge. And if you want to say that then it's fixed or locked or settled, well, fine, but it's not determined, and that's all I care about. So I don't know if I answered your question there, Eric, but I kind of felt on it. But would you add anything?
All I needed to know on that question. No further questions.
We answered it. Excellent. I like when Eric asked the question previously, and then Tim Stratton didn't know how to answer, and so then Eric provided the answer for Tim Stratton.
Answer, and then Tim's like, "Yep, that."
That's the answer. You got the answer for me, Eric. Thank you.
Move on.
Eric's like panicking. He's like, "Oh no, I can't give him the answer. This doesn't look good." It's a Hillary Clinton interview. Here's the answers. Just do the answers.
Quote Craig here, because there's a difference between it being chronologically prior or logically prior.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what Craig says from his book, Only Wise God.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Very good distinction. Very meaningful. There's a lot of sense between chronologically and logically prior. Okay.
Jones does not mow the lawn because God foreknows. God foreknows because Jones will mow the lawn.
Yeah.
Now, this does not mean Jones's action causes God's knowledge. The word "because" here indicates a logical, not a causal relation, one similar to that expressed in the sentence, 4 is an even number because it is divisible by 2. The word expresses a logical relation of ground and consequent. God's foreknowledge is chronologically prior to Jones's mowing the lawn, but Jones's mowing the lawn is logically prior to God's foreknowledge. So now compare that to what Warren says later. He says, if God's foreknowledge is infallible and logically prior to the creature's decision, well, right there, he's just misrepresented Molinism.
It's just misrepresenting Molinism. It's not that Molinism has absurd category creation.
If they're representing Molinism, like fine, you be the ambassador for it. Say things like, we're trying to get rid of determinism and preserve predestination, and then he's using words like fixed and locked. How could he? How could Warren use those words in the 2 minutes of time we watched of him? How could he be using words like fixed and locked? All I want is predestination.
They're like, someone mowing the lawn isn't the cause of God knowing that they're mowing the lawn. It's logically prior to God knowing, but it doesn't cause God's knowing. You're like, what is God? Okay, sure. Those things are rational, intelligent distinctions that have basis in reality and not ridiculous. But here's the thing: the only reason they could say that me mowing the lawn is logically prior to, but does not cause God's knowledge, is because they believe in this soma world in which you could run iterations in a mental model and those be perfectly predictable. People just don't have free will.
They believe people are copy paste.
People, there's no randomness in the universe. People just are the products of our environment, input output robots. You just run the code and get predetermined outputs. That is their view. We are not volitional beings. We have no free will, and we just exist as products. So
you don't think that God's knowledge is logically prior. It's chronologically prior, but it's my decision that is logically prior to God's knowledge. So that's one misrepresentation.
Tim Stratton's like, yep, okay, yep. Okay, okay. It's all nonsense. He's like, yep, yeah, that's true.
Whether again, and I'm going to be charitable here and say I'm sure did that unintentionally, but then on the other hand, now that we've
Warren didn't understand our categories of logical priority and chronological priority. I don't think this was intentional of his. He just doesn't.
He can't think through our clever categorization.
What? Doesn't he know the difference between
we're true philosophers
and chronological priority? I'm not going to fault him here. He probably just didn't know what he was doing.
For all we know, Warren talked about that. They never watched that section. For all we know. For all anyone watching this stream knows too.
Okay. Molinists, your logical priority distinction is stupid. It's made up and it's just absolute nonsense on stilts, just words thrown at a screen. Can you show otherwise?
It's an assumption.
Yeah,
where's your proof?
you're just throwing words out there, and like if I say enough words, it will reflect reality, and no one will ask any questions.
Address that. Then he goes on to say that we could not have done otherwise, but again, he doesn't give an argument other than to say.
Richard says, "I'd love to see these guys explain Molinism to Paul." They're like, "Okay, Paul. So you got the possible and then the potential worlds, and then you got the logical priority, and then you got chronological priority, and then Paul will be like, what is happening here? Like, guys, some sort of weird new Greek philosophy? What is
I encountered this when I went to Ephesus.
That God is infallible, but that doesn't make it an argument. Did you want to jump on that?
No, keep going. I'm tracking with you.
So, in other words, I don't see. So here are two claims. in the
Okay, so we are getting at about 3-hour mark. I'm going to pull up to close this out here. Somebody sent me their interaction. I think it was their interaction with Tim Stratton, and he said, "Hey, you should cover this interaction." And this is on Twitter. I'm not going to share my screen, but I'll read it. And this is Tim Stratton, allegedly. Someone sent me this as a Tim Stratton interaction. Gently push back on one point. This is Tim Stratton talking. Assumably, perfect being theology isn't a Greek philosophical intrusion, as some claim. Rather, it's an inference drawn from the whole of Scripture in harmony with modal logic, and has nothing inherently to do with Plato or Aristotle. Scripture repeatedly portrays God as all-knowing. Psalms 147:5. All-powerful. Jeremiah 32:17. Perfectly good. Mark 10:18. He is love. 1 John 4:8. Eternal. Psalms 92. Spirit. John 4:24. And unchanging in nature. Malachi 3:6. I'm sure that's what that verse is talking about. These are all attributes of a maximally great being, one who possesses the greatest set of composable great-making properties. That's not smuggled in from Greek thought. It's drawn out from the full witness of Scripture. And so there you have it. I'm not reading the full quote, but it's Tim Stratton claims that perfect being theology is implied and drawn out from Scripture because he's got a few references. God says, "I want to kill you all, but I'm not going to change. Therefore, you need to repent, and then I'll repent, and then I won't kill you all, but I really should kill you all." He's like, this is greatest being maximal theology implied by the Scripture.
Narrative history. Yeah.
This is not a Greek import. You have verses like Psalms 147:5. I'm gonna this pull up there. I don't know offhand what Psalms 147:5 says, but how much you want to bet? Like,
it doesn't say anything close to what he's saying it says.
Great is our Lord and abundant in power. His understanding is beyond measure. See, greatest being theology right there. It's just like, God is a maximally great being, which properties need to be maximized because his ability to process is unmeasurable. And the unmeasurable there, and so I am familiar with this verse after we look it up. The same word there is the amount of grain that Joseph collected during the famine in Egypt. He collected a unmeasurable
amount of grain,
yes.
right?
Yes, it's like you couldn't measure it. But this verse points to
the deep intrinsic truth.
the biblical authors that it's not perfect being theology is not a Greek import. You see these biblical authors, they really believed in it. If you look at these verses prove it. So it's
like if I say the word, that's unthinkable, and they're like, whoa, he's making a philosophical statement.
So I think these people really stretch. The Molinists really stretch incredulity with their definitions, the way they go about doing it. I don't think they interact with substance. They're critics. I think that they tend to represent people talking about the logical implications of their system, and they're very dismissive to say, "Oh, you're not describing Molinism like we describe it." Well, yeah, I get that. It's a critique of your system. You need to deal with their critique. Yeah. So they're very fast to dismiss criticism, and I feel like the Molinists I've interacted with historically, they've been a little bit narcissist. Like they're like super full of themselves, where they think that they have this access to this super. Okay, so it's like if you're in economics and you have people who are very wedded to models, Keynesian models of the economy. they're like, oh, we did all this math, we ran all these models, we have these models, and look how they work. It's like these models never predict reality. These models never play out reality. But because they spent all this time putting together this model, and their little math is working out with the past data, it doesn't ever work out with the future data. But they do to you, and they're like, oh, you're just one of those people who just microeconomics. That microeconomics doesn't transfer to macroeconomics. Printing money is not going to cause inflation this time because it's going to go to a specialized basket of goods that's not going to spill over to the normal. It's like you should be hung on a cross.
Okay, little escalation there. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, whatever. I'm a little bitter about inflation. The printing. The Fed and the printing of money.
No, that's what you do. You buy a house, you own it, and then as inflation goes up, you ride the inflation wave of your house going through the roof.
Right. You own property, and as they make houses impossible to build, and then they flood the country with millions of illegals driving up housing prices, you just ride property.
Yeah. You own assets.
You own assets. But anyways, I'm saying the Calvinists are the Keynesians. They're not Calvinists, but the Molinists. They tend to be very full of themselves and self-important in their.
Should we go back to Marvel references?
They'll do Marvel references. They'll be like, remember when Thanos did this? No, I didn't watch. No, I didn't watch.
What's more relatable, a Keynesian reference or a Marvel reference?
Oh, Keynesian. But anyways. It's like I just don't. It's like your theology, your metaphysics. I don't think it's intuitive. I don't think it makes sense. I think there's internal violations, arbitrary category creation. You're not actually solving any of the problems that you intend to solve with this. You're still stuck in fatalism. It's just an untenable system. It's just throwing words at the wall to try to make problems.
The goal is to still be stuck in fatalism. Just play word games around it so you don't feel as bad about being stuck in it.
Yeah, Molinism is determinism with extra steps. And so I don't know whoever said that. Maybe I'm making up, maybe I'm hallucinating this, but it is a good quote. It is a good quote that I hallucinated in my memory. They sure buried Matt Warren in a mounting.
Yeah, we didn't I don't know. We were an hour 20 in, and I think they watched less than 5 minutes of him. I think they must have watched about 3 minutes of Warren that whole time. And that was a reaction video where they repeatedly said, he didn't do this, and he fails to do this, and he hasn't considered this.
Warren, you've been undone.
Yeah, poor Warren.
You should resign from the internet in shame. In shame, Warren. All right, we'll end there. Do you have any closing thoughts? I've already summarized my view on Molinists and Molinism.
I think I said it a couple times, but I just want to reiterate they really are making huge assumptions about the nature of man to think that you can copy paste human beings. That's a big assumption about human beings.
It's very interesting. And since we've referenced it several times on the program, let me go find the video that I watched that there's a video called Soma, the game that broke me. I didn't actually play Soma. I'm just going to watch the walkthroughs. The game that broke me, a Soma video essay by Zegart. It's got 3.5 million views, so it's fairly popular, but it's a very interesting look at this video game that explores concepts such as identity, sense of self, if consciousness, the worth of individuals, AI, these ideas of living in simulations, having copies of yourself existing, and things like that. So it's just very interesting game. And so I would suggest that. All right. So we'll close there. Thanks for coming on. If anyone has any questions or comments, put that down below or start a thread in the God is Open Facebook group. Thank you for watching.